Hello folks, as always VK3AML, starting a few minutes early this week because we have a fairly full program of documentary material to get through in the first 90 minutes worth of this live stream. And so, tonight, Inventing Television, interviews with the people who were there at the invention of the medium, starting with John Logie Baird with his initial demonstration of transmitting pictures of people's faces by reflected light, which he first achieved in October 1925. And we'll hear an interview with Ben Clapp, his first paid assistant, who joined him in 1926, as recorded in 1975. Then moving on, a demonstration of a model of Baird's television outfit that I built with assistance from Clint Turner KA70EI and Mike Groth VK7MJ. This model was videoed by Lionel VK3AML in 2009. Unfortunately, the surviving copy is only in 240p, but as it's the only video record of the device in action, I feel obliged to use it. Then we'll see a little bit of Bell Telephone Lab's initial demonstrations of television in April 1927, a very long time ago, by Dr. Herbert Ives, who will then give a talk on the possibilities of television, recorded on one of the first sound film cameras, 1927. Then moving on, Dr. Vladimir Zworykin, a Russian emigre working in America, largely for RCA, who devised the iconoscope television, electronic television camera tube, which became the staple of TV broadcasters for the first 10 years or so of the public service in Britain and elsewhere. Additional to this, there'll be other things like the first RCA electronic TV test, filmed in July 1936 on the 343 line standard, and an extraordinary film of Sporadic E Reception of BBC TV across the Atlantic at Riverhead, New York, filmed on 16mm film, in November 1938, about 6 months after a sunspot maximum, which occurred in 1937. So, quite a few historical threads. My own background in this sort of historical television dates back 50 years to the time when, in my teens, I was building a mechanical television system because I was fascinated by the prospect of transmitting pictures of relatively low definition. On 160 metres, you can actually transmit these pictures with very, very narrow bandwidth, down to about 5 kilohertz bandwidth. So that was my reason for initially writing to all of the pioneers that you'll be seeing tonight. I actually had a correspondence with most of them, most that were surviving in the early 70s, and beginning with Ben Clapp. But I see it's 9:29. We're about to roll on to the on-air time, 147,475. I'll just check that my stream is going. Looks okay. What's coming back from the source looks okay. No dropped frames. Good. I have to check that every week. I only wish there was a camera operator here that could keep this all in check, but as there's only one of me, it's a bit of a juggling operation to think of the commentary and get into it. 9:29, we're about to go on the air on that transmitter, 147.475 megahertz FM, which covers most of the Melbourne area, with a population, I think, of about 5 million at this stage, so there are quite a few people in the Melbourne service area on 2 metres. 9:30 it is. Hello, this is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima with the regular Saturday night test transmission. This week dealing with the invention of television, as recalled by the pioneers who are actually there, from the first tests of John Logie Baird in the mid-1920s through to the development of electronic camera tubes and into the introduction of the world's first public television service from Berlin, from London and from America. And it's a full night's worth of documentary material, so I'll get stuck into it fairly promptly. If you want to see the video component of what we're transmitting in audio on 147.475, please Google VK3AML 9 April 2022. That's VK3AML 9 April 2022. Well, I couldn't get any video. I couldn't actually interview or correspond with John Logie Baird himself because he died in 1946 in his 50s. But his first paid assistant, Ben Clapp, who joined him in 1926, survived to the year 1990. He was in his late 90s then, and I had a correspondence with him through his Baird colleague, one of his Baird colleagues in the 1980s. And in fact, I managed to fill several lever arch files about this size. I have about 4 or 5 of these full of correspondence with John Logie Baird's associates, people like H.J. Barton Chappell and Ray Herbert, and Tony Bridgewater, who was one of the Baird engineers who engineered the 30-line television tests they had on the medium wave transmitters of the BBC between 1929 and 1935. Later on, Tony Bridgewater joined the BBC, the television staff for the electronics service from November 1936 onwards, became the post-war director of outside broadcasts in the 1940s and 50s, actually engineered the TV coverage of the Queen's coronation in 1952, and in the early 60s was for about 5 years the chief television engineer of the BBC, Tony Bridgewater, and I had quite a voluminous correspondence with him about the first demonstrations of Baird television in Australia. He came out here in October 1928 with Ben Clapp. Both of them you'll see tonight. The only problem I have with tonight's material is I don't know which of this collection of stuff is copyrighted, so I may run into a copyright warning which will cause me to skip forward in the program material. I may, after the posting of this material, get a warning. But as it's totally unpredictable as to what is copyrighted after 80 or 90 years from the date of filming, I can only put it up and hope for the best. So let's have a look at Ben Clapp, who, as I say, I had a correspondence with in his late 80s and 90s. Ben was a radio ham, pioneer radio ham in the 1920s. This is Ben with his amateur radio outfit. And he joined Baird in 1926. This is Ben leaning across the front of a Baird monitor, a mechanical television monitor, looking at the first pictures sent by wire from London to Glasgow by Baird and Company in 1927. Ben had a transmitter with a high power permit, which you see there. That is John Logie Baird sitting with his hand on the rheostat for the filaments of the output valves of the transmitter that they used at Purley. Ben's transmitter, that's Ben standing on the right. And this was the transmitter that they used for the first transatlantic television transmissions, which were successfully done at the start of 1928. Quite a noteworthy technical achievement for the time. So in this clip, filmed in 1976, John Logie Baird's first assistant, Ben Clapp, describes the mechanical scanning television system used by Baird when he first joined Baird in 1926.
I joined Baird the same year that he gave his first demonstration. I was his first engineer, and I was constructing amplifiers and other equipment that he required. He wouldn't tell me anything what he was doing, except I knew he was working on television. He wouldn't show me any of his equipment, and he certainly wouldn't allow me in where the transmitting equipment was. But eventually he had to let me in, and this is what I saw. A large transmitting disc with a series of lenses in a spiral, a photoelectric cell contained in this box, a series of amplifiers, a neon lamp, and a smaller disc with pinholes in the same order that the lenses were on the large transmitting disc. These discs revolved at a tremendous speed. The dummy, the other side of the wall, is viewed by the photocell through the lenses. When the photocell in here sees a bright part of the face, it produces a lot of electricity. A dark part of the face, a smaller amount of electricity. These electrical impulses are amplified by these amplifiers and put onto the neon lamp here, which varies in brightness according to the light or dark part of the image that is being looked at by the photoelectric cell here. These image then on the neon lamp is looked at through the pinholes in this disc and viewed from the other side. These lenses, being mounted as a spiral, scan. The first lens scans the one strip of the face, the second lens is the adjoining strip, and so on until the whole face has been covered. The purpose of the pinhole disc is to reassemble those strips in their correct order as seen from the other side of the wall by anybody looking in. Later on, this receiving part of the equipment could be miles away in a viewer's home, and then be necessary for the two discs to be run in absolute synchronism. Otherwise, the face would be assembled in its wrong order. That can't happen here because these two discs are mounted on the same shaft as they were in Baird's original equipment, and this is how it ran. There was nothing new in this sort of thing. People had been talking about it for the last 50 years. But my old boss, Logie Baird, was the first one to make it work, and he did it entirely by himself. To show his system.
And there you have it, Ben Clapp, John Logie Baird's first assistant, was also incidentally the first engineer who showed television on a similar system in Australia. Now, I was asked to build a mechanical TV demonstration system for the Australian Centre for the Moving Image in 2009, and Lionel Curling, VK3AML, fortunately made a video of the device in operation, unfortunately uploaded it to YouTube, the only surviving copy in 240p. There is the device, again with the two discs on a single shaft. There am I trying to take a photograph of it at the time, back in 2009. The whole device took about 3 months to put together with the assistance of a machine shop. There was some very accurate machining required for the scanning discs, and there you see one of the test pictures coming through on the monitor screen so-called. It was actually a magnifying glass. The picture's the size of a visiting card.
VK3AML, who's going to give us a bit of a talk and a demonstration of his replica of a sound and television system, well, not so much sound, but television system used in England around about the 1926. Okay, Chris, over to you.
Okay, well, this is a demonstration system intended to show the principles of mechanical scanning, which preceded the development of cathode ray tubes for television cameras and television receivers. So at the stage that this was demonstrated in the mid-20s by John Logie Baird in England and by C.F. Jenkins in America, they were limited to mechanical scanners using these things which are called Nipkow discs. disc has a series of holes. The number of holes equal the number of lines in the picture. In this case there are 32 holes around in a circle, placed in a spiral. That one's on the inside of the spiral, that one's on the outside of the spiral.
I'll just go around the other side.
Okay, as these discs rotate in front of a little square that you put in front of the disc, you get a scan pattern, a raster. And each time the disc rotates, it scans one complete picture. So this is the camera disc over here. There's a camera lens there, a condenser lens system to pick up the light transmitted by the holes in the disc and concentrate them onto a photo cell, which is in there. The photo cell is connected through to here. This is a video amplifier. Originally they would have used, of course, a valve amplifier, but we've cleverly disguised in an original 1920s style case a power FET driver and an 18 amp switch mode power supply. There's a video preamplifier there, 18 amp switch mode power supply there, and on these two dirty grate heat sinks with all of their fins there are two power FETs, one there, and they can dissipate between them. If they're called upon to do so, they can dissipate around about 40 watts each. But in this case it's just a simple Class A amplifier. They only ever get called upon to dissipate about 20 watts between the two of them. And that drives this. Inside here is a light source. Originally they would have used a modulated neon lamp in there, which would have been fairly feeble. These days we've used a bank of Luxion high output LEDs, a bank of 8 Luxion 3s in fact inside this housing. And so you watch through a diffuser and the rotating disc with its holes, scanning the picture, the modulated output of these.
I wonder if we can fire this thing up and give a bit of a demo of the sort of images you get.
No worries, I'll just put the box on the lid on the video amplifier again and fire it up. Stick something suitable up here as a test pattern. Turn down our contrast to start. When I fire this up, the motor here, if you can duck around,
I'll just go around.
have a look. There's a motor here that runs at 1400 RPM. Its rotational speed is reduced 2 to 1 by these pulleys and this O-ring drive. And so the main shaft driving the two scanning discs, the receiver disc, the monitor disc here, and the camera disc here are synchronized by being on the same shaft, a metre long. And they're rotating at about 750 RPM, which gives you a 12 pictures per second repetition rate. And when Baird was transmitting these 32 line pictures on medium wave broadcast stations in the late 20s and early 30s, with a repetition rate of 12.5 pictures a second and 32 lines per picture, he was producing moving pictures on medium frequency broadcasting in a bandwidth of about 10 kilohertz, which is the same as you require for good quality audio. So let's hit it. One thing you'll notice about mechanical television is that it does produce a bit of noise.
Okay, we'll just position ourselves.
Gradually bring up the contrast here. This is actually very difficult to demonstrate because, of course, the mechanical scanner relies on persistence of vision to reassemble the picture, and this was strobing against our video camera. You can probably, if you squint your eyes a bit, see the various test cards I'm putting in front of it there. Puppet.
They would have found this amazing in 1926.
There's my own name there with 32 line. So much the transmission of test cards, but you get a much better impression of this if I show you some time exposures of the actual pictures, which I will in a minute. 32 lines, 12 pictures per second.
Oh, that's much better for the camera anyway.
Then I sat in front of the camera and you get a sort of a flickery image of me.
An actual movie of Chris. That's not bad.
Can you see me?
Yes, I can see you very clearly. Unfortunately, there's a slight reflection of me in the glass too, but it can't be helped.
What we can do is put a piece of paper over you. Okay. We're trying to get rid of the reflections in the magnifying lens. You will get some strobing there. There I am again. Find the internal controls of that camera to change your
actually this is well, anyway, it's a very good demonstration. Anyway, you get a Maltese cross or something there too. That would come up good.
Okay. Oops, I think it's scraping on the display.
Oh yes, okay.
So you're seeing an image that, with the exception of those flickery vertical lines, would have been seen by Baird in the mid-1920s. Are you seeing me properly? No
yes,
cathode ray tubes in sight. You should get down this end, Lionel, and we'll be able to see you.
Well, I might break the system. Well, I think it'll do. Okay.
I think this is a fair bit better than you would have been seeing last time.
Oh yes, it definitely is. Well, I hope you, everyone watching this, find this interesting. No doubt there'll be a lot of questions people will probably want to ask. But I think it gave an idea of what the system is all about. And there's Chris again in the as the star of
with that strobing, you don't get much of an impression of what it can do. But just wait a moment, we'll show some time exposures.
Did they ever use this system in Australia?
Yes, it was used first on. They broadcast with this system in January 1929 from 3DB and 3UZ. 3DB is test. 3UZ actually had a broadcast service, just a novelty thing, for about 12 months. The late Gil Niles, VK2KI, who was eventually VK2KI, in those days he was VK3II organised. But there's nothing to stop you transmitting this stuff on 160 metres. It will be carried equally well by anything that will carry about 8 kilohertz of audio. So we're actually producing these pictures in a fairly narrow bandwidth.
Alright, Chris, look, I think this will do. Probably about the limits if I can put up for YouTube. So I'd like to thank you very much.
Dear old Lionel, VK3AML. Well, these time exposures give you a better idea of what the system could produce right at the dawn of television. Some test cards. You're about to see a picture of Lionel 3M himself after these test cards. Just remember, these pictures are comprised of only 30 lines and they're transmitted within a bandwidth of about 8 kilohertz, the same as decent quality audio. So you could transmit these on shortwave. Lionel 3M sitting in front of the camera. And my wife Prue closing her eyes because of the bright light she had to face. Typical of the original situation in the 20s. These mechanical scanners were not very efficient, required a lot of light. Mike Groth, VK7 Mike Juliet, who helped with the construction of the amplifiers for this system, and a little bit with the system itself. And finally, that picture was taken in 1929. It's Baird's assistant, I think secretary, Connie King, taken through the original 30-line TV receiver, so you can see that we were getting results that were consistent with what they were receiving back in the 20s on that modern reconstruction system. This is VK3AML. If you want to see the video going with this, please Google VK3AML 9 April 2022. That's Google VK3AML 9 April 2022, and that'll take you to the YouTube live stream. In this page, you see the first test images transmitted by Gil Miles, the late VK2KI, and his boss Donald MacDonald, the radio engineer who helped to build the first 3AR and 7ZL. In 1928, they set up a company called Television and Radio Laboratories in St Kilda Road, a premises later taken over by Kingsley Radio. They built a telecine machine transmitting these simple images, and actually transmitted crude form of television through 3UZ, 930 kilohertz, at times when it wasn't required for normal sound broadcasting. So these were the first television transmissions in Australia, alternating sound and sight through the one transmitter on medium wave. Funny thing to conceive of these days, but they could transmit moving images of only 24 lines. So moving on. You'll see there that these pictures are reproduced from the original films. Gil Miles kept little samples of the original films, only a few frames, which I reproduced back about 1980 when I was visiting him. Gil died on the Australia Day weekend in 1981, just over 40 years ago. Very nice guy. Knew him for about 10 years before he died. And pioneer aviator. Had been known for some work on aviation equipment, aviation radio equipment from Point Cook back in the 20s. One of the first television demonstrations that was actually filmed was set up by Bell Telephone Laboratories. In charge of their research there was Dr. Herbert Ives. And Ives will be seen in this test, as well as heard through a lecture that he recorded on a Movietone newsreel soundtrack for the Society of Moving Picture Engineers. They now call it the SMPTE. But all of this recorded in 1927, so the film is not in the best condition, but this is the first television film ever made.
April 7th, 1927, the telephone was 51 years old. In a New York auditorium, a handful of people were given a glimpse of the future. It was called television. The show, if you could call it that, originated in Washington, D.C., and starred Herbert Hoover, then Secretary of Commerce. This first crude transmission was the work of engineers from Bell Laboratories. They had invented the transmission system not for the sake of entertainment, but to learn more about long-distance networks. At the time, few people realized just how successful the experiment would turn out to be. Today, the phone company is still deeply involved in television. In fact, the network shows you enjoy, including the one you're watching now, are brought to you through the facilities of the Bell system.
In the mid-1920s, he said, being drowned out, a Bell Telephone Labs team led by Herbert Ives was involved with testing the potential of a 50-line TV system, which you see here, and you saw a little earlier with that scrap of film. Herbert Hoover in Washington, D.C., talking to New York. And again. All using the facilities of Bell Telephone Laboratories, and they made a big thing of it. In actual fact, the research work that this facilitated in synchronized scanning discs and transmission systems was all groundbreaking. They even had a lamp screen with a commutator switching each picture element. This filmed lecture from late 1927 is one of the first talking pictures, and on it the 45-year-old Dr. Herbert Ives of Bell Telephone Labs lectures on the potential of television.
No one has coached me as to how one should address an audience who, as I speak, are present neither in space nor in time. I shall assume, however, that it will be all right if, like the radio announcer, I say, ladies and gentlemen of the movie tone audience. I am going to take this opportunity to discuss a question with regard to another very new development of science, which a great many people are asking nowadays. They ask, what is the future of television? Now that this long-cherished dream of the art of communication has become a reality, how will it be used? Where? And how much? As a matter of fact, no one knows the answer yet. And in the last analysis, it is going to be an economic one. Is the public willing to pay the price? Because it seems inevitable now that television is going to cost a great deal more than the telephone. The young man of the future, when he calls up his best girl, will have to face a new demand upon his pocketbook. He will have to decide whether the sight of her pretty face is worth to him 5 or 6 times the sound of her dulcet voice. If he decides that it is, and the public decides the same way, then the future of television as an adjunct to the telephone is assured. As yet, no one knows how important it is to have sight as well as sound in a message. From a strictly utilitarian standpoint, it is probably true that 90% or more of the message which can be conveyed from one person to another can be conveyed by sound. But we must not make the mistake, as has often been made in technical science, of assuming that because something is small in quantity, it is unimportant. In chemistry, catalyzers. In nutrition, vitamins were long overlooked because there wasn't very much of them. Now, we don't know whether the expression of a man's face is in the nature of a vitamin or a catalyst. It may be. It may well be that in the future, no business deal will be concluded until the parties literally see eye to eye. We don't know as yet what the answer to this question will be. But one of the earliest problems in television is going to be to determine by service trial just how important it is to have the smile with the voice.
Dr. Herbert Ives in 1927. The inventor of the iconoscope, the first electronic TV camera tube with charge storage, was Dr. Vladimir Zworykin. In this 1948 vintage DeMont network telerecording, Zworykin shows his earliest experimental tubes.
And now, we of NBC Television and at Eyewitness are honored to have in our studios the distinguished scientist who helped perfect the crude picture receiver, the kinescope of Boris Rosing, and who alone was responsible for the development of the picture transmitter, the camera tube, the iconoscope. We're happy to introduce Dr. Vladimir Zworykin, Director of Economic Research, I should say Electronic Research, of the Radio Corporation of America. Glad to have you.
Good evening. It has been very interesting seeing men working on television before me.
I know that these names, these great names in electronic research and television research are familiar to you, but I'd like to ask you, Dr. Zworykin, what originally led you to be so interested in television?
Then it is like fever. When the television bug bites you, you never can stop working on it.
I see, and you devoted your energies since your student days to that.
So when I was young, I happened to see work doing on television at that time, well, I think the bug bit me.
The bug bit you there. Oh, who you say you saw work? Who did you see working that first stimulated you in it?
Oh, Dr. Boris Rozink.
Oh, yes.
He was my professor of physics in the university in St. Petersburg.
Uh-huh.
And I coaxed him to let me help him evenings at his work with television.
Well, the world is glad that he would let you work with him. We were talking about the iconoscope, which is your unique development. I wonder if among these tubes, which we have here, is one of the early examples of your iconoscope.
Certainly.
Is this one?
Here is a tube which was made in 1923.
25 years ago.
That's right. That's grandfather of iconoscope.
I see. That's the first real electronic picture tube.
That's right. It has the similar mosaic and the electron gun.
Electron gun.
Of course, the picture produced by this tube was very crude, and it required enormous amount of light to produce it. But basic idea involved is practically the same as in modern tubes.
You kept working, of course, Doctor, there in the laboratories, right?
Oh, yes.
What was your next step?
Well, we continued to work and develop on the same idea, and this is the tube made in 1931.
Uh-huh. Same gun and plate, yeah?
Exactly the same.
What kind of a picture did this one produce? Was it good?
Well, the best to see it, we have picture taken on 16mm film here.
Oh, you have some film that was taken in those days?
That's right.
Of the picture this produced. Can we see that? Oh, there it is now, Doctor.
Oh, yes.
Well, I can tell that it's a young lady smoking a cigarette. The picture's kind of crude. But how did you classify this picture?
That is 16 lines picture.
60 lines. That means from the top to the bottom, it's built up in 60 lines of scanning. Well, that picture wasn't too good. You kept on with your work, Doctor?
Yes, we continue our work, and particularly trying to improve the resolution of the tube and the sensitivity. And here is the iconoscope made in 1935. It was big improvement comparing with this one.
There's a soundtrack gap here, but Zworykin is showing a bit of film taken with that 1935 tube, and here it is at the 343 line definition, considerably improved on the 1931 model from 4 years earlier. Same piece of test film run through the telecine, but you can see considerably more detail. So they're on the right track, even though there are spots, stationary spots on the screen indicating insensitive parts of the mosaic. That's the 1948 vintage.
These were worked out in the RCA laboratories.
That's correct.
Through years. Let's see, we started in 1923, you said.
1923.
The first two, way back there. And now we're up to about
37.
37.
But at that time we decided we are on the wrong track and decided to change the work a little bit.
What did you do?
And then we continue our development and develop this orthicon, abbreviation for iconoscope.
Ah, yes. When you say orthicon, it comes into a word that we're familiar with now, the tube that's being used now. This, in other words, you started to get on the right track for today's development.
Yes. The biggest difference between the iconoscope and the orth is that the scanning can produce with low velocity beam, not with high velocity beam as an iconoscope.
Gives you a chance for more amplification?
Yes, and also eliminate some of the difficulties we had with the iconoscope. Then we continue to work, and that is improvement of the orthicon in about 1939.
That's a big one, isn't it?
But that was too big for practical use. So we improved that, and that was the 1940 edition of orthicon. And this tube is still used now in some of the cameras.
I see.
It's much sensitive than iconoscope, and produce very good contrast.
You say sensitive, that means you didn't have to have the extremely hot and intense light that you used to have at the beginning tube.
You can use about 1/20th of light with this tube than with iconoscope.
That's a tremendous cut. And you're still improving at this stage in 1940.
Oh, yes, we continue to work with this thing, and the result was that we developed this image orthicon.
Ah, yes, the image orthicon. This is the tube which is used now, isn't it?
In the field work.
Yes, I just wanted our friends in television to see this. It has several parts. This is the
image tube part. The image is projected on the photosensitive surface here. Then by magnetic field, the electron image, which is created by photosensitive surface, is projected on the target in this place. Then from this on, it is orthicon. That means the target is scanned with low velocity beam. Then on this end, we have the electron multiplier.
Amplifier.
We call it multiplier, but that works as amplifier.
I see.
And in other words, the tube consists of 3 practical independent electronic devices.
And with the sensitivity of this tube, you're able to go into a badly lighted place, like out of doors or into a price light arena and so on.
It is several hundred times more sensitive than iconoscope.
Are they all the... Go ahead, sir.
It can transmit the picture in the moonlight.
By just the light of moonlight, eh? Are they all the same size, Doctor?
Oh, no. Here's one tube.
Well, yeah, what did
It
you...
looks like this.
And this is the same as that? I mean, does the same work?
Exactly, consists of the same parts, the image tube, orthicon, and electron multiplier.
That's amazing. And the place where the picture comes in is only about the size of a dime.
That's correct.
Well, this could be used then for a miniature camera, like the miniature cameras in regular photography.
That's right. And besides, it can be used in many other purposes besides television broadcasting. For instance, to transmit our vision in accessible places.
You mean up in the sky and...
On the sky, and the bottom of the sea, any place of danger where we don't like to.
Well, when here we have the result of 25 years of work, Doctor. When you started to work on your dream, did you know it would come to this great reality?
Well, it works as we dreamed about it.
I see.
But of course we didn't know that it will take these shapes at that time.
Well, I think you're to be congratulated for holding on to your dream and bringing it to the wonderful reality of today, Doctor.
Thank you, man.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zworykin. And I want to say thank you, Dr. Zworykin, and we hope that you've enjoyed this little visit behind the scenes in Eyewitness. I know I've learned a lot about the technical facts behind tubes, and also I think I've learned something very important. To hold on to your dream. As the example we've seen today through the work of Dr. Zworykin and his colleagues, that dream come to a magnificent realization through bits of tungsten and copper and finely fashioned glass, creating the miracle of iconoscope television we know today. Let's all dream, and let's hope your dreams come true.
A little corny perhaps, but here is a film of the first experimental transmissions of RCA using Zworykin's iconoscope camera tube, a 343-line transmission from the RCA building, relayed to the top of the Empire State Building, and then radiated. And they took a film record of the transmission, not from the screen, but from a simultaneously operating newsreel camera in the studio. And the 2 people in the studio are General James Harbord on the left, President of RCA from 1922, and David Sarnoff, the head of RCA.
This is station W2XK, an experimental transmitter of the National Broadcasting Company. We are operating on a frequency of 52 megacycles by authority of the Federal Communications Commission. A test program follows.
General Herbert, I'm sure this occasion must be as gratifying to you as it is to me and to the rest of us. Ever since you joined the Radio Corporation of America some 14 years ago, you have heard us talk about this new child television. You've watched it come from the cradle and learn to creep, and today, I'm glad to say, marks a new epoch in the development of this child.
I suppose it really climaxes in the fact that you and I are the first actors on the television stage. It's always a great satisfaction when you get within the sight of the end of any great job nearing completion. The gentlemen who, I understand, are in a room somewhat distant from this studio are really seeing what is the result of many years of hard, unremitting effort on the part of our RCA research engineers. Well, that's right, General. It seems rather anomalous for me to be an actor today. I thought a few months ago when we sold part of our interest in the RKO that I was getting out of the movie business. But here I am in it again. There's something tremendously fascinating about all these lights and the glamour, but I don't think you and I are going to be great competitors out in Hollywood with some of the other figures there. Probably not, but I can perhaps judge it a little better if I take a look at you to see what the lights are doing. All right.
Excuse me. I can't say that I'm actually glad to see you gentlemen this afternoon, but I am very glad to have you see me. And later on in the day, I hope to have the pleasure of meeting you.
Goodbye, David. See you later, General.
And Sarnoff pulls out the characteristic cigar. Bit of puffing on it on this occasion.
Mr. Lennox Law to see you, Mr. Sarnoff.
Will you send him in, please?
You come this way, sir. Good afternoon, Mr. Sarnoff.
Hello, Mr. Law. How are you? What's on your mind today?
Well, it seems to me that this demonstration we're going to have today is going to open up a tremendous new field for the National Broadcasting Company.
Well, I hope it will. I'm sure it'll open up a new field for the entire radio industry. Of course, to you who have been trained technically, I need hardly say that there's still a number of problems to solve. I guess you know them as well as anybody knows them. But I think we've proceeded far enough to justify the statement, at least, that these technical problems are not insurmountable. And I want to take this occasion, Mr. Lord, to congratulate you and the boys who are working with you on the splendid results achieved. I know how hard they worked. I know that we've rushed them tremendously to make ready this particular demonstration, which really required some more time. But here we are, and I hope we'll have a show.
Thank you. Well, television, when it comes, is going to open marvelous opportunities for public education and entertainment. But it's also going to have serious problems in operation and in programming.
Yes, it'll have many problems on many fronts, and I'm glad that I don't have to solve them all myself. I'll let you boys do the rest. Well, now, as I understand it, there's some arrangement been effected here whereby a show will be put on. It will go over from here to the Empire State Building over the coaxial cable, and from there out in the air, and the results are to be seen on the 62nd floor of this building, I believe. And perhaps you and I would do better to go up there and look at some real actors.
That would be very nice.
Distinguished guests of RCA and NBC gathered to witness the historic event.
It is with much pleasure that the Radio Corporation of America welcomes its licensees to a demonstration today of television broadcasting. I will now introduce some of the early arrivals for the demonstration. Mr. Leslie Muter, President of the Radio Manufacturers Association for his third term.
How do you do, ladies and gentlemen?
Mr. James Swank, the genial right hand of Mr. A. Atwater Kent.
I'm very happy to be present at this demonstration today.
Mr. Jack Rogers, Vice President of Crosley Radio Corporation and the radio industry's leading golf referee.
I'll just interrupt that at this stage to say that what you're watching is the first experimental broadcast of electronic television done by RCA on the 7th of July 1936. So rather a milestone in electronic television for America anyway. The British television service on 405 lines didn't open until November of the same year, 1936, but this was transmitted on the 343 line 30 frames standard. So it was starting to look like television had a good commercial future in 1936. If you want to look at the video of accompanying the transmission we're doing on 147.475, please Google VK3AML 9 April 2022. That is, Google the live stream, just set into Google VK3AML 9 April 2022. Google that phrase and you'll get us. Back to 1936 on the roof of the RCA building in New York.
Glad to be here.
Mr. Ed Poor, chairman of the board of High Grade Sylvania, and the only left-handed golfer that hits them straight.
I trust the machine is doing us justice. We were not selected for our appearance, but for our courage.
Mr. Harry Sparks, vice president and general manager of the Sparks Withington Company. We wish that his father, Captain Sparks, could also be present today.
He's playing down in Florida.
Mr. J.R. Howland of the Philadelphia Storage Battery Company.
It's a pleasure to be one of the early televisitors.
Mr. Ernest Alschuler of the Electrical Research Laboratories.
It is indeed a pleasure to be in this initial trial for television.
Mr. A.S. Wells, president of the Wells Gardner Company and the Svithiat Singing Club.
I'm very glad to be one of those who are present today.
Mr. Ben Abrams, president of the Emerson Company and a director of the Radio Manufacturers Association.
Thank you for your invitation. I'm glad to be here with you.
The antenna from which the program will be transmitted is clearly visible from here on top of the Empire State Building. The receivers are located on the 62nd floor of the RCA building.
Eddie Goodman. You remember you have a very short introduction to your first girl and to have her enter the set at the end of your first sentence. Do you understand that?
Yes, she's
the first
right
television
on.
fashion show.
That's right.
You got that signal?
I'm almost afraid to tell you gentlemen that we've planned a fashion show for you. I can imagine what you say when your wives try to drag you to a fashion show. But this is different. You don't have to budge. Of course, if you get bored looking at the beautiful girls, you can turn your chair around, but you don't have to, since there's no one here but just us boys. Let's see now what our first model is wearing. You might think that this is a beach costume, but it isn't. This is the newest for dinner wear. Norvelli is blowing you a goodbye kiss before she goes back to Bonwit Teller. And we're going to fade out our fashion show, but don't you worry. You'll see a lot more satin bathing suits if you spend your vacation at a beach. And Norvell says she'll be looking for you.
Good afternoon. This is Milton J. Cross, very delighted to be allowed to participate in this demonstration on television. For your delectation, we draw on Holme for that droll comic Eddie Green and his partner George Wilshire, offering a little philosophic erudition.
Hello, Jerry.
Oh, look at here. Yes, sir. Where you dressed? Where you going?
Boy, I'm going down Lennox Avenue to the restaurant to get me something to eat.
I'm glad.
Like a baby loves his mother, like strawberries love cream, like an Italian loves bananas, That is how the radio audience loves Edwin and his stooge to end all stooges, Graham McNamee.
It's not often you hear a vaudevillian lost for words, but Ed Wynn certainly was in this first television broadcast.
They asked me about a half to come on here, so naturally I didn't prepare anything. I don't know what to say. Suppose I should make a speech of some kind. Well, I don't know. Ladies and gentlemen, in behalf of the National Broadcasting Company, I'd like to behalf of the National Broadcasting Company. That didn't sound so funny to me, but I just thought of it. I feel privileged, ladies and gentlemen. Something annoying me there. That's silly. I don't know what to say. I feel privileged in being asked to appear on the first real television demonstration that the world has ever known. To me, that's... I don't know what else to say. Well, I guess I'll go.
Ed! Ed!
That voice.
Ed!
That voice! Graham! Hello, Graham.
Pretty good.
I'm so glad. I was just saying to some of the people here.
You were?
This television, I don't seem to understand it. The whole thing is so... They told me about a half hour ago.
You mean to say you don't understand television?
I never even heard the word about
Well,
it.
for heaven's sake, Ed, I'll tell you all about it.
Yeah.
Now, in television, you see, we stand here and people see us in other places.
Well, that's what Miss Brainerd
You see
said,
what I mean?
Yes.
Now, Miss Baird knows all about television, too. She started it.
Well, I don't know.
But anyway, Ed, in television, everything is opposite, crosswise, you know, cockeyed. And, for instance, your left hand becomes your right hand.
Pardon me, something's been annoying me.
Ed, will you pay us some little attention while I tell you about television? Now, Ed, now, for instance, you say you know nothing about it, but I'm sure... Well, I don't believe you can even tell a left hand from a right hand, can it?
Oh, well, that, of course, that's absurd. Go ahead, Graham.
Well, all right.
I don't know what's in your mind.
All right, I'll try it. Now, Ed...
As long as we're ad-libbing, we may as well ad-lib. I mean, I don't...
Ed, which hand... which is it? Which hand is that? Huh? See what I mean?
What do you mean, which hand is it?
Which hand is it?
Ed Wynn and Graham McNamee on one of the first RCA tests of television, transmitted on the 7th of July 1936, 86 years ago. I'll run it forward to the closing announcements, if I might.
Our first television program for July 7th, 1936 has just been concluded. This is station W2XK, an experimental transmitter of the National Broadcasting Company. We have been operating on a frequency of 52 megacycles by authority of the Federal Communications Commission and are now signing off. Good afternoon.
And bringing you back to the present. This is VK3AML with the regular Saturday night test transmission and the concurrent YouTube live stream if you want to see the visuals that go with this material on the invention of television. Please Google the phrase VK3AML 9 April 2022 and that should take us to the YouTube live stream so you can see the pictures that go with the audio. Apologies for the quality of this audio, but it was 9 decades ago that all of this stuff was recorded. It survives in very variable condition. The BBC, meanwhile, with the development of the electronic camera tube, which they called the Emitron, just as Zworykin called it the iconoscope, the BBC managed to get their so-called high-definition 405 line service on the air in November 1936. And there was no way of recording television programs at that stage. However, one survivor of that first 12 months of BBC television is the so-called demonstration film, which they would run outside normal broadcasting hours so that radio distributors could have some material to indicate what television was generally like, to be able to sell television sets demonstrated on the shop floor. So let's bring that up. I just have to change my settings here, and let me take you back to about March 1937 with announcers Leslie Mitchell, Elizabeth Cowell and Jasmine Bligh transmitting television from the Alexandra Palace in London, the world's first, or acknowledged as the world's first, general public television service using electronic television.
Ladies and gentlemen, the purpose of this film is to give a brief survey of the kind of programs which have been and are being transmitted by the BBC television service. We want to emphasize that it has been made for demonstration purposes, that is, for manufacturers and viewing rooms only. It is not intended for home reception. Most televised programs, as most of you know, are transmitted direct and not from film. We are particularly anxious that those of you who should be watching this demonstration should not receive the impression that television programs are simply televised film transmissions.
Since the opening of the television service in November 1936, the programs transmitted have covered a wide range of entertainment and interest. A great part of the time has been given to light entertainment, in which many cabaret and variety artists have been used. But drama and ballet have also been well represented. Opera and revue have been attempted, and a variety of outside broadcasts have been carried out in the grounds of Alexandra Park. Talks by experts on many subjects have been given, with appropriate illustrations. Before passing on to show you some of the artists and speakers as they appeared in the studio, we show you the television orchestra with its conductor, Chaim Greenbaum. Ladies and gentlemen, the television orchestra.
I believe that what sound broadcasting has done for music, television may do for painting and sculpture. In the last few months, I've been taking works from the London galleries to the Alexandra Palace and commenting on them and showing them. In the comments that I've made, I've tried to be impartial, but I've kept in mind all the time the high percentage of so-called modern art that's always to be seen in London galleries nowadays. This is a painting, a landscape, by the English master Thomas Gainsborough from the Agnew collection. It's an example of Gainsborough's early work before he went to Bath and executed his famous portraits. And this is a masterpiece of another kind. It's a contemporary painting by a Spanish artist whose work, although he's over 50 and his reputation is enormous, still causes many quarrels. His name is Picasso. This picture is very intense in color and very lovely. I think quite as lovely in its own way as the Gainsborough in its way. And finally, this is a carving by the young English sculptor Henry Moore. It's a carving in wood. Moore is a Yorkshireman in his 30s, and he has a rapidly rising reputation among critics and connoisseurs.
And I think we can do without the next act, which is a dancing act. This is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima with the regular Saturday night test transmission, concurrently running material related to the invention of television, and this is a 1937 film, the demonstration film, so-called, of British television at a time when very few sets were being sold, and each set cost the price of a small car. In 1936, this British television service ran until 1939, when it was closed as a result of the onset of war. Reopened in 1946. Well, these transmissions of 405 line television were only 2 megahertz wide, so they could be received in exceptional conditions at great distances by sporadic E propagation. And RCA at their Riverhead, New York receiving station heard some strange signals on 45 megahertz, I think it was, in November 1938, which proved to be the British television signals. And they actually filmed them. So this is BBC TV from Alexandra Palace, received by RCA via sporadic E during the sunspot maximum of 1937-38 across the Atlantic. And this is from a private collection. You'll see that not the whole bandpass was propagating at once, so the pictures are occasionally slipping, and occasionally you will catch a picture. There's a man and a woman there singing, I think, on the screen. These 16mm films are without sound. That's Jasmine Bligh, the female announcer, one of the 2 female announcers we just saw. All this recorded at a distance of 3,000 miles across the Atlantic in November 1938. An extraordinary film, and the film was actually made on one of the first Kinney recording cameras that RCA had ever set up. So it's a noteworthy scientific achievement from several points of view, this little 4-minute film. Still Jasmine Bligh doing her announcing on the station. Fading in and out very rapidly, characteristic of sporadic E, of course. But these transmissions were right at the bottom end of VHF. There's Elizabeth Cowell. And now, if you squint your eyes, you can see that there are 2 performers here, a man and a woman, in 18th century costume, singing some sort of a period piece. Could even be Anne Ziegler and Webster Booth, I'm not quite sure. Seen at a distance of 3,000 miles, they were lucky to record anything. And the sync slips, of course, when the part of the passband carrying the sync pulses drops out. Somebody looks like they're wearing a turban in the Alibaba style here. You'll notice that most of the shots are medium or close-up to make use of the limited available definition. Even though it was 405 lines at the time, the cameras couldn't really make the best usage of that limited definition. The Emitrons were definitely limited as a camera tube. Now, this is part of an animated film of some kind. Very blurry, I know, but what can you expect at this distance across the Atlantic? So far as I know, this was the last time that pictures... Oh, there's the BBC's interval signal, their test card. Grey step wedge on the right, a circle in the middle so that you could line up your vertical linearity on your cathode ray tube. BBC television service. November 1938, one of the very few surviving recordings of the BBC TV's pre-war service. Now, the Johns Hopkins Science Review was the first TV program made in Britain for an American audience, and this particular episode of it went to air on the 7th of May 1952. And it's a review of British TV development to that time. The upload was made on a YouTube channel, very good YouTube channel, I thoroughly recommend it, called Free the Kinescopes. Free the Kinescopes, exclamation mark. And on there you'll find many kinescope, that is film recordings off a TV screen prior to videotape, of late 1940s, early 1950s American television, or material which has survived in America. And we're very lucky to have this issue of the Johns Hopkins Science Review. It was made for the Dumont network, a network which actually failed very early in the history of American broadcast television. But in the course of this transmission, the Johns Hopkins Science Review, they managed to interview many of the pioneers of British broadcasting, British television broadcasting. J.D. McGee, an Australian who developed the Marconi EMI Emitron camera, and Tony Bridgewater, formerly on the engineering staff of John Logie Baird, later a pioneer television producer for the BBC, or television engineer. Tony Bridgewater, born 1908, died 1997. One of my correspondents, actually. I had a very long correspondence with Tony during the 1980s. He began work for John Logie Baird in 1928, taking a closed-circuit 30-line TV system, complete system, about 7 tonnes worth of equipment, to Australia with Ben Clapp for demonstrations at the Capitol Theatre building and later at Menzies Hotel here in Melbourne in 1929. Went back to Britain in 1930, joined the BBC as a television engineer, initially working on the 30-line medium wave broadcasts in 1932. In this program, he operates the old 30-line flying spot mirror drum camera used by the BBC, and this is the only time that camera and that equipment was ever filmed in operation, May 1952. He became the chief TV engineer of the BBC from 1962 to his 1968 retirement. So, the Johns Hopkins Science Review, and this is Sylvia Peters to introduce it.
States. I'd like to say a brief hello to our viewers across the Atlantic. Tonight we begin a series of 3 programs entitled An American Looks at Science in Britain. These are the first British programs to be recorded and shown in the United States. To mark the occasion, the American ambassador has kindly agreed to say a few words by way of introduction. His Excellency, Mr. Walter Gifford.
I'm very happy to be here on this occasion, the occasion on which television programs are being produced for the first time by showing both in the United States and Great Britain. As an American, I know that in the United States, our people are fairly well informed and very proud of what they have achieved in scientific endeavor. However, I also know that they have very little awareness on the whole of what has been achieved and accomplished here in Great Britain. For a better understanding, this project of the Johns Hopkins Scientific Review is going to be of great help.
Mr. Lynn Poole of the Johns Hopkins University arrived by air with his wife last week, and he was interviewed at the airport by his producer in this country, Andrew Miller Jones.
Well, Mr. Poole, we are delighted to welcome you to England to take part in this Anglo-American television program project.
Well, thank you, Mr. Miller-Jones. It's awfully nice to be here. We've been looking forward to it for a long time.
Well, sir, we too, and I'm sure that viewers in England and in America too would be very glad to hear what you are expecting from this collaboration.
Well, we're expecting a great deal from this project. In the first place, we hope that it will add its small bits to this great tradition of happy Anglo-American relationship that we've had for so many generations. Also, I hope that it will give us an opportunity to show our people in America some of the great things that are going on in the scientific world in England.
Well, I hope they won't be disappointed.
I'm sure they won't. My name is Lynn Poole, and I am here in the BBC studios in London. At the moment, between me and the screen in your home is a lot of very complicated apparatus, which is worked by a large team of engineers and program staff. Each has his appointed job to do before you can see me here in this studio. Now, in charge of all this activity is the producer of the program. He gives the word and sets things in motion.
Crowd, please. Stand by.
Studio, stand by.
Now that order was relayed to the studio by the studio manager. The camera is approaching me, and I'm looking it full in the face. But even then, before my picture reaches you, the engineers have to adjust the controls in the apparatus room. They must do this to be sure that the picture has good quality. And when they're satisfied, the picture comes to the transmitter. There, it is finally adjusted and boosted up before it is sent out through the aerial. Now, this aerial was erected on one of the towers of Alexandra Palace in London in 1936. And the top of the aerial is 600 feet above sea level. And in this manner, the picture of me is sent out to the people in the south of England. And now that you can see me face to face, may I say good evening and tell you how very happy and honored I am to be taking part in this Anglo-American project. Now, you have seen how the picture leaves this studio and reaches the audience in the south of England. Perhaps you'd like to see the studio in which I work in the United States. This is station WAAM, which is situated on a high hill in Baltimore, Maryland. And now, let's go inside the studio and see how we present one of our typical Johns Hopkins Science Review, which reaches 23 cities over the Dumont network in America. And with this brief introduction, let's return to television in Great Britain. We selected this program tonight because we wanted to show you, both here and in America, something of the story of BBC television. You've seen the aerial in this transmitter on Alexandra Palace. Now, this serves the southern part of the country and reaches 12 millions of the population. Now, in England, the stations are more powerful, and they serve a larger area than do our stations in America. Now, at the same time that this signal is transmitted at Alexandra Palace, the signal is taken by coaxial cable to Birmingham, which is 110 miles to the north. Now, these signals are then radiated by a transmitter at Sutton Coldfield. This area serves 7 3/4 millions of the population. Sutton Coldfield, by the way, is another powerful transmitting station. And for those who are interested, the input of this aerial is 45 kilowatts. Sutton Coldfield was opened on December 17th, 1949, and marked the first stage in the making of a nationwide network here in Great Britain. From Sutton Coldfield, coaxial cable takes the signal to Holme, about 200 miles north of London. This transmitter serves an industrial area in which 11 million people live. Now, at the moment, Holme is the most powerful television transmitter in the world. And the day after I arrived in England, I was fortunate enough to go to Huddersfield in Yorkshire and have a look at Holme. Now, I can assure you that it was one of the most exciting experiences of my life. And when I say exciting, you can see what I mean in just a moment. The transmitting station is situated on the bleak Yorkshire moors, 700 feet above sea level. Now, I went up myself to this rugged site and was overcome by an urge to climb this mast. So I was given a flying suit, which you see here, loaned to me by Mr. Buckle, the engineer in charge, and started my ascent up the first ladder. As I reached the first level, I got on a very thin little ladder, which was almost like a lattice. And the higher I climbed, I could look down and see the station below. The station below is spread out over these Yorkshire moors. One can see a great distance. Remember, this mast is 750 feet high. Here, the television signal is transmitted over miles and miles of territory. One looks down here on this little station, which is a most important station in the transmission of television for Great Britain. Now, a radio link carries the signal from Holme to Kirkoshots, which is situated 400 miles north of London, midway between Edinburgh and Glasgow, Scotland. This makes television available to some 4 million people who live north of the border. Now, here we are at Kirkoshots. It was opened on medium power on the 14th of March, 1952, and ultimately its transmission strength will be 5 kilowatts larger and higher than the Holme Moss, situated near Huddersfield. Now, the distances involved in television in Great Britain and America are vastly different. We at home are used to a television network that stretches over thousands of miles. For example, you remember only a few days ago that the explosion of the atomic bomb on the desert in Nevada was televised to millions of people living 3,000 miles apart. But there is one essential difference between transmission over area here in Great Britain and that in America. The difference is that the stations here are more powerful. Those of you in America know that our networks are made up of 40 to 50 different stations, but each station is less powerful than the ones that I've shown you here tonight, because each station in America covers only a radius of perhaps 50 to 60 miles. Well, in Great Britain, it's very much, television is very much like the daily newspapers. They're national in scope. Well, so much for the electronic distribution of television. How did it all begin? It began in America and it began in England. And in America, I think we consider the pioneers of television to be Dr. Vladimir Zworykin and Dr. Alan B. Dumont, where here in England, I think Lodi Baird is accepted popularly as perhaps the father of television, but Baird is also well known in America. As a matter of fact, here is Dr. Baird at work in his laboratory. Now, if it had not been for Baird, for his single-minded belief in television, the public service would not have been started in England in 1936. Perhaps I should tell some of you and remind others that Dr. Baird developed the 30-line system, and his original apparatus has been put into work at this very moment for the television conference convention which is being held at the Institute of Electrical Engineering here in London. Now, the Institute is situated just under the shadow of St. Paul's Cathedral on the embankment of the Thames. And we have sent an outside broadcast unit, or as we say in America, a remote broadcast unit, into the lecture hall in order to show you this historical piece of apparatus at work. Now, it will be described by Mr. Bridgewater, one of Baird's youthful associates, a man who is now a senior BBC engineer. Good evening, Mr. Bridgewater. Can you hear me?
Good evening, Mr. Poole. Yes, I can hear you very well.
Well, it's nice to talk to you, and how about putting this famous museum piece through its paces?
Certainly, I'll try. Well, behind me is the original camera projector which was used by the BBC in 1932, having been made for that purpose by the Baird Television Company. And it remained in use for 3 years, giving experimental programs.
I'll just interrupt there to say this is VK3AML with the regular Saturday night test transmission. At about 7 minutes past 11, I'll open up for a live QSO on the air. Here, Tony Bridgewater is demonstrating the flying spot scanner that was used by the BBC for medium wave television transmissions on a 30-line standard, 12.5 pictures per second, between 1932 and 1935. This is the only film of it in operation, and Tony Bridgewater was one of the original camera operators. So this is about 25 years after its original usage. I'm amazed that the whole thing still worked. It didn't work terribly well, as you'll see from the pictures, very streaky. But after all that time, the mirrors both on the receiver mirror polygon receiver and this camera had gone slightly out of alignment, but they nevertheless could produce pictures, as you'll see. Back to Tony Bridgewater, 1952.
Now, just to have a closer look, I will remove this side cover. And here you see the arc lamp, which provides the source of light. The light passes through a tiny aperture just in this metal disc below my finger here, probably a little too small for you to see. And then a thin, narrow ray goes through this part of the projector, through a lens and onto a mirror, and then onto this mirror drum, and thence onto the screen or the scene being televised. So now this drum is interesting. It contains 30 mirrors round its periphery, each one slightly displaced with respect to the other, and it is this which builds up the scanning process. I think you may see the surfaces of this a little more clearly if we swing round this projector now. There you see the different facets and the reflections. But now, if we turn the projector back onto the screen, you will see the spot of light and the scanning process, I think, quite clearly. The spot moves up in adjacent paths as each mirror reflects it onto a different position of the screen. There it goes. But of course the whole process is greatly speeded up in operation. That will be done in a moment. Now, the light reflected from the scene, from this spot as it scans the scene, is picked up by photoelectric cells in those two boxes which you can see on either side of the screen. From those photoelectric cells flow small currents or signals which ultimately can be broadcast to the home viewer. Well, so much for the camera for the moment. Let us now go and look at a typical old home receiver. Now, this 30-line receiver was put on the market in 1933. You will see that it has a screen here, and it is of the projection type of set, not uncommon even to this day. The picture, you will notice, is a rather odd shape. It is long and narrow in the vertical direction. Well, now turning to the side of the set, which has been uncovered for our inspection, you don't find, as in a modern receiver, a cathode ray tube, but instead there is a small lamp inside this box here, which sends light through a little device called a car cell. Now that provides the light and shade controlled by the incoming signal necessary for the picture, which is built up again by the light being reflected onto another mirror drum, which I dare say you can see rotating in here, and then reflecting the light onto the screen. This drum goes, of course, at the same speed as the one in the projector which we've just been looking at. So now let us try to bring together the old and the new. This old 30-line receiver and this modern outside broadcast camera, one of our latest types, which is going to try to pick up pictures if we can coax them from this ancient receiver. You see the cameraman just pressed the button and that had rotated electrically the lens turret, and he's brought into position the correct lens. So now as the lights go down, we prepare to tune in and attempt this experiment. We will first of all show you our subject as he is being televised, and then later we hope to show you the reception. We're just adjusting the receiver. You see the picture slipping by, but that can be corrected, I think. Yes, stationary now. This is the actual reception. You caught a glimpse of him just now being transmitted there. That is the transmitting end now, as you see. And now if we go back again, you'll see the 30-line reception.
Well, Mr. Bridgewater, we certainly thank you for this demonstration, and I would like to say that I recognize the gentleman that you've televised. It's a countryman of mine, Mr. Axel Jensen, who is attending your convention there, and I'd like to thank you both for your cooperation.
I think there is no doubt that John Logie Baird was really a pioneer in television. But whether the Americans or John Logie Baird were the first in the field, TV, as it is practiced today, was certainly given a great signpost and a go-ahead by Campbell Swinton, here in England, who published a letter in Nature magazine in 1908. And if you don't mind, I would like to read you a paragraph from that letter. Campbell Swinton wrote, "The problem of obtaining distant electric vision can probably be solved by the employment of two beams of cathode rays, one at the transmitting and one at the receiving station, synchronously deflected by the varying fields of two electromagnets." Well, now in 1912, Campbell Swinton showed in his presidential address to the Renton Society that he showed them a circuit. And this circuit is basically the same, bears a remarkable resemblance to the type of television that we use today. Now, I won't explain it to you, except to say that it bears this remarkable resemblance to the type of thing that we are used to today. I thought it might interest you to see it. But everyone was working at the same time. Many people on both sides of the Atlantic were researching in their laboratories and were theorizing about television. But it was Vladimir Zworykin in the United States who produced a electronic television tube in 1931. But very shortly thereafterwards, another tube was produced in England by Dr. James McGee. This tube was produced in 1932. And it's our privilege and pleasure to have Dr. McGee with us tonight. Dr. McGee, I would like to take this tube from you for a moment.
I'll just interrupt this to say this is VK3AML on 147.475 and simultaneously live streaming on YouTube live stream. If you care to tune in on the video accompanying these audio tracks, please Google VK3AML 9 April 2022. At about 7 minutes past 11, we'll be taking a sort of a callback on 147.475. In the meantime, the last of the Johns Hopkins Science Review from 1952. Dr. J.D. McGee, seen here, was the Marconi EMI company's equivalent of Vladimir Zworykin. He developed, in parallel with Zworykin, a camera tube called the Emitron, which became the staple of the BBC in its earliest years of the 405 line service. And here he demonstrates one of the earliest progenitors of the electronic camera tube to be made in Britain in the very early 30s. Largely his own work. Dr. J.D. McGee, who incidentally was an Australian from Sydney.
And show it to our viewers because I want them to get a very good look at this remarkable thing that you did.
Pleasure, Mr. Poole.
I want you to have a good look at it. Oh, perhaps we should put it over here on the corner of the desk and ask Dr. McGee to tell us a little bit more about this tube.
We'll turn it round this way so as the viewers can get a better view of the tube. This is really now quite a historic museum piece, as it goes back to 1932. At that time, a colleague, Mr. Teddem, and I were working on the electronic tubes for television, and which you have been just describing, and we were very impressed by the suggestions that he had made. And so we set out to try and repeat those experiments in practice.
And this is a sample of one of the first tubes that you made.
This is a sample of the first tube that actually gave a television picture by electronic means.
Well, I wonder, Dr. McGee, if you would show us this one also. I believe this is the tube that Dr. Zworykin produced just about the same time as yours.
This is a tube made just about a year earlier by Dr. Zworykin, and it was the first to give a television picture by this means in the United States.
Well, I'm sure they both worked very well, but, But this tube is one that I'm very interested in your showing.
These tubes were very crude in their beginnings, and they have led eventually to this modern tube, which is used in these cameras as which are transmitting this picture to the viewers at home.
Well, we're all very grateful to you for your fine work, and I think that everyone will be most interested in having had the opportunity of seeing these really historic pieces and seeing Dr. McGee, who did so much of the early work. But what about television in Great Britain before the war? Well, there was a lot of television here at that time, and you might be interested to know that the first service programs that went on the air were in 1936. Now, these were no mere experiments. The programs were being broadcast to the homes and the receiving sets here in England at that time. Now, during the past week, I have had the opportunity of seeing a number of the recordings of these pre-war programs, and I asked whether I could show some of them to you tonight. But before we do, I would like to tell you that the voice you will hear describing these programs is the voice of Miss Sylvia Peters, whom you saw opening our program tonight. And the young lady who will dance at the close of this film is none other than Margot Fontaine, who is very well known in America, but at the time that she was on this television broadcast, she was very little known in her own country.
The station was ready to transmit its first official program.
A mighty maid of mystic magic rays is all about us in the blue.
The first outside broadcast in the world was that of the coronation procession on the 12th of May, 1937. Feature of pre-war outside broadcasts was the transmission of stage shows from the West End theatres, such as the Coliseum and the Victoria Palace.
A very young Margot Fontaine in the pre-war studios of the Alexandra Palace.
Were being produced here in 1936. And during the past week, I have noticed many similarities and differences between television in Great Britain and in America. One difference that I noticed immediately was that the announcer appeared in flesh, in vision, at the beginning of the program. Another thing, most of these announcers, the majority of them, are women. And before the war, there were 2 women announcers here in Great Britain, and I would like you to meet one of them tonight. It's a privilege to have her with us, Miss Janet Bly.
Good evening, Mr. Renfrew.
Nice to see you, and won't you sit down?
It's very nice to be here, and I would like to take this opportunity of saying good evening to the viewers both in England and in the United States of America.
I'm sure they will be all glad that you had the chance to be here with us too, Miss Bly, but I wanted to ask you this. You've been in television almost from the beginning, in and out of it. Tell us something of your experiences, your feelings about television.
Well, I was an announcer for about 3.5 years before the war, from 1936 onwards. And as well as doing ordinary announcing, I used to do a lot of stunts for television, a lot of outside broadcasts.
Well, what do you mean by stunts?
Well, I was rescued by a fireman in a firefighting demonstration, and I did trick riding on a motor bicycle. And then I took a microphone up in an auto gyro, which was televised in television. And I used to be known as the Pearl White of television.
Well, I know that our American viewers will know exactly what you mean when you say we're the Pearl White, because she really went through perils, didn't she?
Well, I had a great deal of fun doing it.
I'm sure you did. Well, may I ask you rather a personal question? Here in Great Britain, as a woman, do you find that you have equal opportunity and equal position with men in television?
Yes, I think very definitely women have a very equal position. In fact, I think they're almost on top in television, because there are more women announcers than men at the moment.
Well, I'm sure that there are many of them on top, and I judge that you would say it's a good profession for women.
Well, I can't give you an absolutely unbiased opinion because television is my first love and always was, but I think it's a very good profession for any girl to take up.
I'm sure it is, and I'm also sure that there are many men at home in America watching this program who are going to write to their stations and to the network and say, please give us some very pretty women announcers. Well, Miss Bly was working in television here as it went along, but television closed down in 1939. The stations closed for fear that enemy airmen would use their beacons to follow a way home into England for destruction. But after the war, television opened immediately in 1946, and Miss Bly was on hand to help open television. Television has really gone ahead very swiftly in England, and in 1949, the Lime Grove Studios were opened. These studios had formerly belonged to the Gaumont British Film Corporation. Here are 5 tremendous studios, and one of them we are speaking to you tonight. Now, England has great plans for television. Things are going to move ahead, and they have many hopes. Now, I'm not qualified to tell you about them, but I would like to mention one. There is one plan that they have which seems to me very exciting, and that is the plan to build the Great White City. And I'd like to show you a photograph of it. This is the model of the city which will be built here in London one day, housing all television under one roof.
Television Centre, still used.
The BBC TV is going to carry on broadcasts back and forth between England and Paris. There are great things afoot. Now, I've seen very fine dramatic programs. Last night I saw a perfectly wonderful ballet for an hour and a half on BBC TV. But I would like to show you very briefly 2 or 3 shots for some outside broadcasts in which I'm sure we'll all be interested because we all like sports.
I think he can speak for himself there, not being a sports fanatic. But it indicates the breadth of coverage of television in Britain in 1952. 4 years later, here in Australia, we got television. Channel 7 was the first on the air with test transmissions mid-year.
We have told you the story of television in Great Britain. As you know, this program tonight is being transcribed on film, and tomorrow will be flown back to the United States, where it will be shown to the viewers of the Johns Hopkins Science Review over the Dumont Network. I hope you'll be with us for another program. Our second program is going to come remote from the Royal Society, which is situated near Piccadilly Circus. Will you be with us then? We hope you will. I'd like to bid you good night and thanks for being with us.
The program was devised and produced by Andrew Miller Jones.
And with thanks to the YouTube channel Free the Kinetoscopes, Free the Kinetoscopes, exclamation mark. Give that channel a look. There is an American, name not stated, organisation not stated, who is simply putting up online one very early American kinetoscope recording after another. Kinescope recording, I should say. Basically the means of recording television that was devised by filming a television screen on a 16mm synchronised camera prior to the development of videotape, which came in about 1958 to 1960. You're listening to VK3 Alpha Mike Lima. I'm now preparing to go on to 2 meters for a callback. So I have to switch my monitoring arrangements. That should work. So, this is VK3AML now calling CQ to anybody who'd like to pop in for comments or a chat on 147,475, 2 metres in the Melbourne area. VK3AML now standing by.
VK3 Alpha Charlie Zulu and VK3 Echo Charlie Golf.
VK3 ACZ Peter, VK3 ECG Dave, and I have our regulars on. I hope that this stuff on the invention of television was not sufficiently far off your field of interest in amateur radio, but I thought it was worthwhile gathering all of the stuff together in one evening. And I had the privilege of writing to several of the people seen in that program, including Ben Clapp and Tony Bridgewater, because they all lived into the 1990s. Consequently, when I was a teenager in the early 1970s, they were all hale-hearty and in many cases rather surprised to hear from someone asking them about 30-line TV. My interest in that was the fact that moving picture television can, in fact, be transmitted in a narrow bandwidth on HF radio or on even medium frequencies, as it was done by Baird and Company. So I was anxious to know about the techniques and wrote to them all, and I've kept the correspondence preserved in lever arch files, quite a pile of them. I'll have to see about getting those into a museum someplace. Anyway, Peter, how have you been since we last saw each other on Monday? I'll take you first with a pause if anybody else would like to break in. VK3ACZ and the group VK3AML.
Yeah, nothing heard. VK3AML in the group, VK3ACZ. Good evening, Chris, and good evening, Dave, and other listeners. Was it anything in my range of interest with amateur radio? Oh, absolutely, Chris. Anything to do with reception of radio signals is in my alley. But it's also it's an amazing part of history. Man, there were some fantastic images there. The movies from, say, the 1920s or whatever, silent pictures or whatever, I think there's an expectation that that sort of stuff would be preserved. And it's kept in cans, and it can, well, it used to be kept in cans, and it can be brought out at any time for people to watch. But TV images are a once only sort of thing. They go out into the ether, and you don't expect them to come back. So we were watching all of that. I have to say, Chris, though I enjoyed the whole thing, and Mr. Logie Baird's steely look at the camera there said a fair bit. Well, what he didn't say by his look, but my highlight of the whole thing was that Sporadic E, and I noticed in the preamble for that they mentioned that it was the high sunspot period. My understanding is that Sporadic E is not dependent on sunspots at all. It seems to be the same in the lows or the highs. But it was still marvellous to see those images. It didn't matter how corrupted they were, how ordinary they were. And it just reminded me, and I know I've mentioned on this test transmission evening before that it used to be one of my highlights to watch Channel O Brisbane on television, or their test pattern at least, before Channel O Melbourne started to transmit the Sporadic E that we were getting then, and either Sporadic E or actually no, it would be Troppo at Channel 6 on top of Mount Tassie. It used to be great watching that with very little QS Baker at all. So yes, as I said, my highlight was that Sporadic E crossing the big pond, as they like to call it, and just very special broadcast tonight. Very special test transmission tonight with all the content on it. Fantastic stuff. Anyway, been a good week otherwise here. Lots of DX on 20 metres, 15 and 10, and I'll say more about that in other overs, but I even got a bit of Sporadic E to Darwin on 10 metres this afternoon. Back to you, Chris. VK3AML in the group, VK3ACZ.
Do we have any other breakers? VK3AML?
VK3BLX.
VK3BLX. I'll put you in there to go in after Dave. But nice to hear you there, VK3AML. Look, just returning to all of that, a couple of queries on the live stream text. Chris Baird asking why I didn't mention the Germans. There were a number of things I didn't mention in the course of that transmission. One was that the Germans pipped both America and Britain technically to a broadcast TV service in 1935, the year before Britain. But it was not a public broadcast service as we would define it today. It was under the control of Dr. Goebbels' propaganda ministry, and the broadcasts were mostly to public television shops, we would call them, shop fronts, where you would walk in, pay your 10 cents or 10 pfennig or whatever, and watch a couple of TV monitors transmitting from the Deutschen Post Office transmitter tower at Witzleben in what's now East Berlin. So they were trying to use television as a public indoctrination medium, and the sale of private television sets to all but the Nazi elite was discouraged. So it was rather Orwellian, that whole German television service, but the good thing about it is that they used intermediate film as a means of shooting for video transmission in the early days, and a lot of those interfilm recordings have survived. So there is quite a bit of recording of German television transmissions from 1935 through to 1941. I think they closed the service. They also had German television transmitting out of the Eiffel Tower when they took over Paris in 1940. They stupidly thought that they couldn't be seen anywhere outside France. Meanwhile, the British were watching the nightly television broadcasts of the newsreels made in Paris and showing the damage that had been caused by the bombs dropping, and were actually using the German television transmissions to aim their bombs more accurately. So that was kept secret until after the war. But television was actually developed to a fairly high degree before the war, particularly in Britain. And as one who grew up in Britain, Dave would probably remember the 405 line TV broadcasts on low VHF. VK3CG, Dave to take it, VK3AML.
Yeah, VK3AML in the group, VK3ECG, and good evening, Peter and John. Yes, I do indeed. I think I've mentioned before, my father was an inveterate searcher or rummager amongst the second-hand shops of East London. So we didn't have a good television at home. Many of my friends had, some of the early colour televisions, and but we had black and white television, but we had a lot of them. I would have thought that as a child growing up, we would have had, I don't know, would have been 5 or 6 televisions at home, of which probably only 1 or 2 could be said to give a reliable picture at any one time. There was an awful lot of rummaging around and fiddling around with the back of the sets and getting the vertical gain and synchronization right and things like that. I remember, as I think I mentioned before, my cousin, who's my cousin's down in his 90s, he built a kit television, valve kit television, when I think he was a sort of a late teenager, and that would have been in the sort of first years from the war, Second World War, I suppose. But we had an endless amount of various sets. As soon as a set would sort of go on the blink, it wouldn't be worth repairing, and so my father would find another one for a few pounds in some East End second-hand shop, and that's how we proceeded. So it was always an interesting experience watching television. But yes, I certainly do remember the 405 line, black and white pictures on the low VHF, and certainly that was one of the, and of course the TV things like here was one of the issues, of course, about which bands were available and what could be used. So there was quite a few bands around the world that weren't available in the UK, as is still the case. and of course to some extent Australia as well, because of the old transmitters being sort of changed over and wound down, and there would be one or two places in the country where you still had VHF when it's just long gone in other places. Usually some of the more remote places, though there's not many truly remote places in the UK, there were areas where their signal would be very, very poor in the sense of getting anything from UHF getting out there would have been problematic. Amazing antenna arrays on houses from time to time, I remember, and a lot of fiddling around with rabbit ear antennas, including people having to stand in the corner of the room holding these things endlessly while, because it's the only way you could get a picture. But that was the way things were. But it was a fantastic, test transmission type with some fabulous images on the YouTube. As I said, I was watching it with great interest and enjoyed some of those older pictures, including, well, not so old pictures of your fantastic operational model, I suppose, of the 32-line scanning transmission system, which was fabulous. And it's nice to see equipment built in wooden boxes, I have to say. Back to you, Chris, VK3AML and the group VK3ECG.
Well, if the 1920s replica gear wasn't built in shellacked wooden boxes at the very least, it wouldn't look right. So I felt I had to find a source of shellac flakes. That was a bit of a job. And I knew that in buying those I was contributing to the extinction of a Southeast Asian beetle, which apparently is the source of that material. But I was quite well paid for the job on that John Logie Baird replica, which we built mostly by looking at his original patent diagrams and then adapting the gear for more modern equipment that could be replaced or that would have greater longevity in a museum display that was designed to last 8 years. It actually lasted 10. For example, the receiver in the original Baird equipment was a flat plate neon lamp, fairly feeble. You would have to have a darkened room to see it. So knowing that the display space would at least be partially lit from the point of view of public security, I had to up the brightness by using a bank of either 6 or 8, I think it was, Luxian 3-watt LEDs, arranged to be orange colour to imitate the colour of the original neon, and modulate them with a series Class A modulator using FETs rather than valves. But the box was designed with metering that actually was contemporary to the late 1920s, hiding the guilty evidence of the presence of FETs and light-emitting diodes. But yeah, it was an interesting time. I was rushed to do it. I was told, I think in November 2008, that it had to be finished by the end of January 2009, so I put in a lot of long hours over that. And my wife lost access to the dining room table. It was the only workspace we had in our house back in Surrey Hills that was big enough to accommodate the damn thing. I don't know what's happened to it either. It's been taken off display, as has the whole of that television display, by the Australian Centre for the Moving Image at Prince's Bridge, Federation Square. I'll have to find out if they scrapped it, or hopefully they didn't scrap it. I think it'd be worthwhile keeping it. But I had the cooperation of members of the Narrowband TV Association in England, who got the discs, the scanning discs, very accurately cut for me, actually in stainless steel, over there in Britain. It was an interesting project. Anyway, with that, round to John, VK3BLX, and I'm delighted to hear you in there, John, VK3AML.
VK3AML and the group VK3BLX. Yes, good evening, Chris and Peter and Dave and anyone else listening. Yes, apologies for the long absence. Every Saturday night I feel guilty that I haven't made out here, but there's always seems to have been something else happening. But tonight I had a bit of free time. I did come in late. I think I came in about half an hour after you'd started, so I had to scan through the YouTube stream. Didn't miss too much, I don't think, but I thought it was really interesting. Certainly all the sample transmissions, the discussion of the development of the various scopes up to the image orthicon. Yeah, really interesting stuff, no doubt about it. And I too was very impressed with your replica or model of the early 32-line system. That was excellent. Gosh, you really put some work in on that. I hope they haven't scrapped it. It's certainly something that deserves to be preserved, even just to be able to be rolled out occasionally for school groups or something like that. Just to comment on something you said, Dave, when you were talking about the number of TVs you had in your home, I'm afraid straight away what flashed into my mind was that Monty Python sketch where, I'm just going down to the shops, dear. Oh, could you pick up another TV, love? Oh, yes, okay then. I don't know whether you remember it, but I hope your house didn't look like that one. Okay, nothing much other than that to add. Just really appreciated that historical stuff tonight, Chris. Really top stuff. VK3AML in the group, VK3BLX.
VK3BLX and the group VK3AML. Well, thanks. With the scrap TV sets, my predecessor with my call, who had a fine sense of humour, a practical joker in many ways, Tony Sanderson, who died in 2006, sadly, at the age of 61. For his family's television set, he had a process, because he was a whiz with fixing stuff, knew a lot about circuit theory, had worked in car radio service very early in his career, in his teens, and later on worked in the early days of information technology and ended his career with CSIRO Minerals and Energy in charge of their computer lab. Tony used to wait until Council Hard Rubbish Collection Day. Now, for people overseas who might be watching this, most councils back in the 60s, 70s and 80s used to have a single day where everybody would be induced to put any garbage, old televisions, old radios, heaters, microwave ovens, anything that had burned out and they couldn't get rid of. They'd put it out on the nature strip, on the sidewalk for Americans, and the council truck would come around on that one day and get rid of all of that unburnable, otherwise undisposable rubbish. Anyway, Tony would pick up a half a dozen television sets, some of them very good, off the hard rubbish, Blaupunkts and Sonys and every other brand you could think of. And he'd take them home, he'd stick them on the test bench, see if he could fix them. Some of them were incredibly easy to fix, like a single cartridge fuse had blown, or a single electrolytic in a power supply, something basic usually. And so he had some really good television sets through the years, but if he couldn't fix the set, he would take the set back in the dead of night and put it back on the pile from which it came, so that the thing would appear that nothing had been disturbed. Well, that all worked well until one year he had a lot of sets and he'd been drinking some home brew, I think it was stout, and he forgot which set related to which garbage pile on which person's front lawn. So a number of people in the Surrey Hills area were treated having put a Blaupunkt out on their rubbish the previous night to find that it had miraculously changed into a Sony receiver the next morning. And I can only say that I wish I had been there with a video camera to film the reactions. Back to Peter, VK3ACZ, VK3AML, with a pause.
VK3AML in the group, VK3ACZ returning, and good evening, John. Good to have you aboard. Chris, I couldn't help but wonder, these pioneers that we were seeing, do you ever speculate, like I do, what they must, what they would think if we brought them here to 2022 and showed them our plasma flat-screen TVs and the rest of it? You know, we're watching sport with almost every blade of grass visible. I'm wondering whether they could have conceptualised in their wildest dreams what TV would become for us couch potatoes to sit there watching our sport. Well, not you and I, but I think you know what I mean. Now, I was going to ask Dave about this anyway, even if TV wasn't on the subject tonight. I went and saw the movie The Duke this week at the Belgrave Cameo, starring Helen Mirren, hope he's still my beating heart, and Jim Broadbent. And for anybody who hasn't seen that yet, I won't give any spoilers, but one of the things Jim Broadbent's character was doing was demonstrating or protesting about TV licences for senior folks and how it should be not compulsory. I vaguely remember TV licences here myself when I was very, very little in the 60s. I, of course, much better recall somebody putting in the scare tactics to say that after the dismissal in 75, federal government, that Malcolm Fraser's government, even before they were elected, had already printed up the television licences that were going to be reintroduced. Truth never gets in the way of a good story. But the movie, getting back to the Duke, it also showed the van going around spotting people who didn't have TV licences, and I don't know how that works, whether they listen on the local oscillator frequency or whatever of the TV set, but and I'm in a roundabout way getting to my question for Dave. The movie at the end said that in something like 1979, seniors were no longer required to purchase a TV licence. I'm just wondering when TV licences finished in England, or if they have already, and what does Dave know about them. The only other thing is that I said in my first over how impressed I was, or just amazed and thrilled with the Sporadic E images, however messed up. I also have a snapshot picture I've taken with my own with my own internal camera of the men standing on top of the RCA building looking across back at the Empire State Building. And yes, I do notice when you see those old pictures of the Empire State Building, the TV tower conglomeration on the top looks a lot different then to what it does nowadays. But anyway, back to you, Chris, and certainly echo John's comments about it being super interesting tonight, the test transmission. VK3AML in the group, VK3ACZ.
VK3ACZ in the group, VK3AML. Well, I'm sorry that the video that Lionel shot was, in the old days of YouTube, 240p was a common upload resolution, particularly if you had dial-up, as Lionel did in those days, and would take you a whole night to upload a 240p video of 10 minutes. Now, Lionel shot those on a Handy 8 camera, which would have been standard def 480p, and I've done my best to try and track down the original videotapes, which I think might have gone to Anthony 3JIA, but what's happened to them from there I just don't know. So unfortunately the 240p upload was the best surviving upload that I could find. I did a lot of work, particularly on the kinescopes that you saw, on getting rid of noise, hum. Commonly on the American 160 hertz and 120 and 180 were there. You could comb filter those without affecting the speech at all. Likewise on the British uploads, 50 cycle hum was great. We got rid of that. and I was also able to flatten the frequency response on each of those. Levels were all over the place. Commonly when stuff goes up to YouTube, people don't bother to get it near 0 dB. Some of these things are uploaded with the peak level at about -20. It's unbelievable the differences in audio level and frequency response of different YouTube uploads. But then that's the sort of thing you can expect from non-professional equipment, or from material that is extremely old, as those kinescope recordings now are. Don't forget to look for that channel called Free the Kinescopes, with an exclamation mark. That phrase, Free the Kinescopes. And whoever, I hope they're watching me now when I say it's a fascinating resource. Most of it is entertainment related, but there are those Johns Hopkins science reports from 1949 to 52, from the DeMont network. The DeMont television network failed very early in the history of American television. I think it failed in about 1953 financially. But DuMont cathode ray tubes you'll still find in second-hand sources, particularly for Australia. They made lots of cathode ray oscilloscope tubes. A number of old oscilloscopes I've broken over and found DuMont cathode ray tubes in is just amazing. But Free the Kinescopes channel has a lot of kinescopes from the old DuMont network, which miraculously have survived for 70 years. And it's wonderful to see the stuff. Primitive in production values in many cases, suffering from low definition and frequently from filming off a TV screen with lots of non-linearity problems, particularly horizontal linearity. But I did note some performers, quite famous performers, making their very rare television appearances, like that young bloke who appeared in Giant, who died very young. Somebody will pick me up on his name. Rebel Without a Cause also he appeared in. He's there appearing in television plays on the Free the Kinescopes channel. So I'm raving a bit, but that was very good that we managed to find in a segment of a program from 1948, the long interview with Dr. Vladimir Zworykin, which as far as I can see is, in technical terms, the most comprehensive review that Zworykin made of his career and the equipment that he developed on film. Wonderful stuff. Okay, around to Dave, VK3ECG. And were any of the old 405 line sets that your father got pre-war, or were they, of the those classic pre-war sets with the mirror lid, or with the marvellous, very characteristic of pre-war radios as well, varnished plywood construction with the curved Art Deco fronts? VK3ECG and group, VK3AML.
Yeah, VK3AML and the group, VK3ECG. No, they weren't of that. I mean, I think I do recall those, and I recall some sort of aged relatives, I think, having something like that, the lid ones. But no, they were more modern than that, and I suspect that they were mostly sort of immediately post-war. I think sort of some of them would have been 50s stuff, some was 60s stuff, and then at some point my father was persuaded that actually getting a modern colour TV would actually be a benefit to everyone. I think he fought back on that for quite some time though. Interesting, Peter, TV licenses. Now, it is interesting because they are still there. You still are required to have a TV license in England, and I know that because my mother has now reached the age where she is not required to have a TV license if you're 75 years and older, and you get pension credit or something, I don't know, so I'm not sure exactly what the situation is, but certainly the restriction. In fact, it's really interesting because, of course, this all happened since I left the UK, but it's actually quite interesting what's covered. So I've just looked it up since you asked me the question, and I knew they were still around, but I didn't know how much they cost. They cost £159 for a TV license, but you only have to pay £53 for a black and white TV set. And that's the same for homes and businesses, actually. And it's rather interesting. You can get a discount license if you have severe vision impairment. I know, it sounds like a Monty Python sketch in its own right. And I do remember that sketch section. And I have to say, our home was sometimes a bit like that. But obviously the things that have changed that I hadn't sort of really picked up on, because I've been in Australia during the time, was of course the sort of move towards internet and transmission, including live transmissions that are coming through on a device rather than a TV receiver. And so a single TV license covers all equipment in a single property: a TV set, a computer, a laptop, a tablet, a mobile phone, or any other device that can receive a TV signal. And this refers to something that's being effectively broadcast live. You do not need a TV license to watch non-BBC programmes on online catch-up services. You don't need a TV license to watch videos or DVDs. You don't need to watch a license to watch things from YouTube, nor closed-circuit television, which I think sounds pretty obvious to me. But effectively, if you're watching the equivalent of, sort of what they have, sort of having equivalent of iView is their iPlayer, which you watch live or catch up on demand, and you've got to have a TV license to watch a catch-up program of on BBC iPlayer. So if you downloaded the app on your phone, you still require a TV license to watch it, and that's true for today. And so if you want to record a program in somewhere on a computer, that requires you to have a TV license. But I do remember the TV detector vans. It always looked like something from sort of some war movie or whatever, where the radio detector vans were going around trying to find secret spy radio sets or something, because that's exactly what the vans were like, driving around London looking for people who had a TV. I presume they were just picking up the EHT sort of signals that were coming from a television set, which would have been an unusual form of electrical interference, I suppose. And they'd look up the house and see if there was a TV license for that house. And if there wasn't, there'd be a knock on the door. And if you had a television in the house and you couldn't produce your license, then you were fined. And I think the fine's something like £1,000 or so now. So it's not insignificant, actually. So there we are. Yes, and the business around the free license, that would have been going on for a long time. So when they finally brought in the business about the elderly not having to have a TV license, there had been a lot of ongoing anger about those things, especially as you had to have a TV license, which went to the BBC, the money, even if you only watched ITV or some other channel. So there were all kinds of sort of complex arguments that existed around that sort of thing. Anyway, it's an interesting piece of history, and as for being stuff left outside, I mean, I don't think we did have those sort of hard rubbish collections in the UK like that. You had the tips you could go to, and that was another place my father used to filch TVs and things from. But the Steptoe and Son sort of rag and bone men were still going around, and certainly in my childhood I remember them coming along with a horse and cart, and crying out, and people would take stuff out, and they'd give them a few bob, whatever it was, and it was mostly scrap and things like that really collected. But I certainly do remember them, certainly in my childhood. Anyway, back to you. VK3AML on the group, VK3ECG.
VK3ECG and group VK3AML. Well, certainly the business of scrap collection has changed since I was a kid. I think I'm close to the same age as yourself, Dave. And I remember the garbage man in the 50s coming around in East Hawthorn with a horse and cart, with an open cart at the back with visible swarms of blowflies buzzing up and down out of the cabbage leaves. Oh, God. And the chap who was in the front of the cart, not only did he not wash, but it looked like his clothes hadn't been washed for quite a while. And so when the garbage man came round, you tended to disappear. He would pick up the tin bin and empty it into the open tray at the back, and the odour was somewhat rank. The only person who would come out to meet him was old Mr. Harris across the road, who was a First World War veteran, who had the best roses in the street because he chased the garbage man's cart with a trowel because he wanted to get the feces hot to put on his roses. He reckoned the body heat of the horse helped his roses. He had prize roses. But the smell of the garden was not exactly prized. We also had bottle-os in the days when there was value in recycled glass, and I can't see for the life of me why they don't make glass bottles pay returnable just as they used to in the 60s, because it reduced the amount of waste incredibly to have reusable glass containers that were washed rather than thrown away. And the bottle-o used to come along the street with his truck yelling out, "Bottle-o! Bottle-o!" There used to be one that came past my primary school on a regular basis, and I used to do imitations of him in a ventriloquial way that would keep the teacher wondering. I must have been all of 7 years old at the time that had put it at 1961. Anyway, with that, round two, John, enough of this frivolity. VK3BLX and group VK3AML.
VK3AML and the group VK3BLX. Oh, what's wrong with a little bit of frivolity on a Saturday night? Yeah, Chris, talking about the bottle-o there, I remember telling my kids about that, because we used to have the bottle-o come around our area in Camberwell on occasions. Same call, bottle-o. And when I related this, I just sort of got these blank looks. According to them, a bottle-o was a grog shop. That's the only bottle-o they'd ever heard of. And so there's a little bit of education, historical education needed there as to the origin of that term. And we didn't have the kind of rubbish collection you're talking about, but we did have the baker's cart come around East Camberwell. And we too had a similar neighbour. He wasn't growing roses. He had the best vegetable patch in the street. Now, I know he always came along quite shortly after the van. He wore steel clips on his heels and toes, and you'd hear him coming up the street, sort of click clack, with the rumble of the wheelbarrow right up the street, scrape onto the next pile. And the kids used to have a great laugh about this, but he had the veggies to show for it, so that was the main thing. Excuse me. Dave, your description of the second-hand dealer reminds me very much of the old Steptoe and Son series, which we used to enjoy immensely. I didn't realise it was a documentary, but there you go. You learn something new every night. And just one other comment. Dave, you mentioned, imagine what these early pioneers would have to say if they saw our modern TV images today. I think they would probably be mightily surprised but delighted that their efforts had led to what we see today. Because if it wasn't for the likes of them, we certainly wouldn't be where we are. but I think their look of surprise would pale into insignificance compared to the look of sheer. Well, they would be utterly dumbfounded, I think, if you were to then show them the electronic circuitry that underlies our current systems, including, of course, the complexity within each of the innocent-looking little black multi-legged blocks on the circuit boards that we showed them. You know, pull out some A0 pages showing what the insides of those look like. I think that'd really have their eyes wide open and their mouths wide open, and they would wonder what century they'd actually come into. VK3AML, the group VK3BLX.
That's for sure, John. VK3BLX, VK3AML. I think of the number of things that we've seen in the course of even the last 25 years that nobody could have predicted. The demise of the cathode ray tube. Nowadays, there was a whole period in the 60s, 70s and 80s where anybody dealing with the history of television would almost discount mechanical scanning as if it wasn't true television. Obviously, it was capable of producing results. In the case of John Logie Baird, it produced good results up to about 300 lines definition. But now, the number of different display devices we've got flat screen TV based on LEDs and liquid crystals. That wouldn't have been predicted 30 years ago. The whole time that the cathode ray tube was the go for television, generally domestic TVs were 17, 21 or 29 inches. Not much more than that unless you paid an absolute fortune. Because as the screen diameter increased, the weight of the CRT had to go up by the cube, not the square of the dimension, so that cathode ray tubes above about 30 inches were not terribly practical. Suddenly, with flat screens, we have efficient, light, very high definition images in devices that we can just about hang on the wall like a picture frame. Who would have seen that 25 years ago? I mean, there were a few flat screens around 25 years ago, but only for computers, and I don't think TVs had been that way. And the progress at the camera end, from the cathode ray tube, the Vidicon or the image orthicon, through to the charged coupled device, effectively a photodiode array that could be made so tiny that an entire video studio, effectively with audio and video, can be fitted into something the size of a matchbox, like the Hero 3. What do they call it? The little action cameras that are the size of a matchbox and can produce 4K images. Who would have foreseen that those things the size of a matchbox, action cameras, can produce images now that are up to 10 times the definition of anything available professionally in 1990. It's just incredible. As for what the pioneers thought, even in the 1970s, I actually asked H.J. Barton-Chapel, who was with Baird as his kind of publicist. He was a technical writer, had been the editor of, I think, Practical Wireless, a London-based journal in the 20s, how he felt about television, because his book, in the course of building a mechanical television system with VK3UI, Dan Van Elken, I used his book called Television for the Amateur Constructor, published in 1933. And it was all on mechanical television, which could be knocked up in the average home workshop, unlike CRT devices. And I said to him in one letter, how do you feel about the amount of progress that's been made in the 40 years since you published that? And he said something to the effect of, I sat watching the moon landing in 1969, which at the time of writing that letter was only 3 years earlier, with my mouth open. And I think he added, and I considered everything that I pushed in the early 30s ultimately to be hugely worthwhile. So I think I would have felt proud at that moment too, if I'd had a large amount of importance in getting the whole medium started as he did. So I feel privileged to have been around and cognizant and writing to these guys 50 years ago at the age of, what was I then, 18, being in touch, as it were, with the very first generation of people who were television engineers. VK3ACZ and group, VK3AML.
Yeah, VK3AML and the group VK3ACZ. Well, Chris, I understand why you would feel pleased. Yeah, sounds really good. And I think John pretty much nailed it, talking about those multi-legged grey things. And imagine the old pioneers looking at them and saying now, can I use my biggest soldering iron to to put them onto the circuit board? No, it would be quite something. And yes, a bit of smugness on their part, or a bit of a pride wouldn't go astray. And Dave, I'm absolutely surprised, floored almost, to think that there are still TV licences in England, and especially with the price. I presume that was an annual fee that you quoted there. You know, for things like, say, a fishing licence here, well, you understand why you're doing it, because Fisheries and Wildlife, you know, will stock some streams with trout, or you know, or there's research that goes into monitoring the populations and setting bag limits and that sort of stuff. I'm just scratching my head to try and figure out what the public benefit is for TV licences, other than a sneaky way that the government can screw some money out of you. But anyway, and one other question for you, Chris, the elephant in the room, perhaps. Well, not literally. I'm wondering how Prue is going. How's she getting on? Is she back home? VK3AML in the group, VK3ACZ.
Leaving a pause. VK3ACZ and the group, VK3AML. No, she will be in hospital, we think, another 10 days. Situation is that she's gone back to hospital. She had the spinal operation, the lumbar spine, to relieve pressure on the spinal cord, because she was losing the use of her legs. It's almost comical what's happened, although it resulted in something that caused her a lot of pain, which I can't really laugh at. The doctor warned her that as the nerves controlling the legs come back online, once the pressure on the spinal cord is relieved, you have to be careful as to how you control your legs, because you might have a lot more strength in them than you think you have. You'd have to get used to using your legs again after the neural paths have been blocked for a significant time, like possibly a year or two. And so Prue took the doctor's advice on doing treadmill work within a week of having the operation, which was a pretty serious operation, putting in a plate separating two lumbar vertebrae to relieve pressure on the spine, and bone grafts also involved. And she managed, in the course of one particular strenuous exercise on the treadmill, to tear very significantly a ligament in her leg down near the Achilles tendon, which was incredibly painful for the poor dear. So they have her in hospital. They're giving all sorts of physio treatment. I don't think the ligament's going to be surgical intervention involved, but just retraining her in walking. She's actually walking a little bit better every day. She still needs the Zimmer frame, but she's gradually straightening up. And that's a very great relief for me to see, because we thought she'd end up in a wheelchair, and me as principal carer. And it looks like, yes, I'll have to be a carer for a while, but the way she's recovering, not forever, which is very good. My only problem is that she's in West Ivanhoe, not near any train, bus or rail. So I have to do a 2-hour commute to Heidelberg Station and back with a $15 taxi ride at the end of it to the hospital that she's in at a pole of inaccessibility. But the problems in my life compared to hers are very small. Just cooking for myself and doing everything for myself here at the moment. So I hope that answers the question. Glad to hear about the lots of DX on 20 metres too, Peter. And I haven't forgotten not this coming Thursday, or is it this coming Thursday? Yes, I think it is, that I'm due to come out to coincide with you at Baronia and do a video of one of your DX sessions away from home. I'll be interested to see how you do it all with the portable outfit and manage to get through to so many places in Europe. So over to VK3CG, Dave. I must say, Dave, hearing all of these expenses involved in living in London, it must be a damnably expensive place to live. I mean, the cost of meat there, the cost of vegetables, and now I hear that you have to pay so much just to listen to bloody radio. VK3ECG. What a bastard of a place Britain must be. Sorry, the British viewers, but it's the picture that's being painted is not very attractive, although the intellectual resources of Britain are so far beyond ours. I often feel that we live in a cultural backwater. VK3ECG and group VK3AML.
Yeah, VK3AML. I think, John, it might be you, actually. Do you want to take it from VK3ECG?
No, you take it, Dave.
Okay. Thanks. Yes, I'm not so sure about that. I mean, it is an interesting place, and yes, it is very expensive. And London used to be I used to think London was very sort of actually a dirty, smoggy sort of place, and I can still remember the smogs that used to happen. But with smokeless coal and the changes in the removal of fires in the home, and that all changed. And of course they made a real attempt in the sort of, I think it must have been in the sort of 90s, to really clean up the city buildings, because all those stone buildings were completely black. But the cleaning processes have been dramatic, and now of course with the restrictions on petrol and diesel cars in the city, and indeed the move away from sort of road fund sort of licenses and things for the more modern low emission cars, electric cars, etc. That's been a really big push, and things have cleaned up an awful lot. But the expenses can be quite frightening. On the other hand, I remember arriving in London, it would be, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, whatever it was, and just thinking to myself as I arrived, I was going off the next day somewhere else, where can I go tonight to, get some sort of entertainment food, whatever, and I just sort of went onto the sort of What's On site, and, I could have gone to, I don't know, 20, fabulous, classical music concerts, plays, etc. And there were tickets for these things, and I did. I just literally got there and rang some place, and within half an hour I was, sitting in the Wigmore Hall listening to a glorious concert. And that's just, and there was such a choice just for that one night. And that's the sort of thing I think you get in those, those sort of super large, busy cultural cities, and it is quite extraordinary. Here there's some fabulous stuff in Australia as well, but you sort of wait for it to come around, and everyone anticipates, what's coming and so on. And that's true for the UK as well, but there's always something on, and there's always multiple things on, which I find extraordinary. I've done this in other places. In Australia, I arrived in, I remember it was about a few years ago, I arrived in Adelaide and literally got to the hotel, threw my bag down and just said, I wonder what's on. And Deflator Mouse was on at the theatre, which was around, probably a good sort of 20, 25 minute walk away. And it started in half an hour. So I I sort of grabbed my coat, rushed out of the hotel room, walked fast, and on the way booked a seat on my using the mobile phone. So you can do those things, which is great fun. The person you're thinking of, I think, Chris, was James Dean, in terms of the film and so on. And what else have I got down here? Oh yes, and of course the talking about the issue around what people would have made modern sets. There's a whole heap of other things in a similar vein, really. I mean, thinking about things like what would have artists of olden times made of the modern paints and modern pigments and modern media and so on. And same with music. I mean, it makes you wonder what a composer like Beethoven or Bach would have been able to do with the more modern instruments and the ranges and the tonal variation that instruments have got today, which the early Baroque and Renaissance instruments were far more limited in that flexible sort of scope of playing. I mean, still amazing, but the enhanced sort of instruments and things today make you wonder how Bach would have written if they'd had a Moog synthesizer available as well as a glorious pipe organ. Maybe the music would have been a bit different. Who knows? It's really quite interesting to think about those things. And I'm glad Prue's strength is coming back and so on. It is a long haul from that sort of stuff, I know, and it is very easy particularly where you haven't had the same muscle tone for a while, to cause injury with tendons and ligaments and things like that, and they are very, very painful things. I mean, I've got nothing like that, but I started to develop a bit of plantar fasciitis, and that's, and it takes forever to get better with all the exercises and stuff like that. These things are not quick, unfortunately, and unfortunately as you get older they slow down the healing process, which makes it a bit worse. But that's absolutely right, though. I mean, I remember I had some disc issues in the past, and one of them left my sort of the quadriceps on the front top of your thigh quite a bit weaker than it had been, and it was fine except getting into the car. I'd open the car door and I'd just lift the left leg up to get in the car, and I wouldn't lift it as high as I thought I was lifting it, and then I'd trip over the sill. And that was just simply having to relearn that I actually need to use more power in order to lift the leg up. I mean, and it's because it's got better since then, but it's funny how those things, they do literally trip you up, and you have to learn that different strength that's required for bits and pieces like that. Well, as long as it doesn't actively kick you too much, I'm sure things will be fine. Anyway, back to you, Chris. VK3AML and the group VK3ECG.
I don't think she'd kick me in a hurry. She might order me to, do more in the garden or whatever, but that's about the size of it. I'm one of those people who looks around a room like this one or a garden like ours, and I let it go and go and go to the point of entropy where it looks like a pigsty, and finally I set aside a day and just do the lot. Throw everything into it, get it all done, and it's back to looking spick. And then, about 2 months later, I do it again after getting frustrated, pardon me, with the look of it. Those comments on instruments too, I was surprised in my 20s when I first saw a clavichord and a harpsichord of the old type. The major difference of those plucked string systems seems to be that you don't have much control over dynamics, light and shade, and emphasis of one note within a chord as you do with a piano, or a modern piano, I should say, hammer device. So in the days of Bach, I suppose the ability of keyboard instruments to reproduce dynamics was greatly reduced. And in fact, with the Bach preludes, I don't think there is all that much light and shade in terms of louder and softer involved. It's just a very complex series of chord structure progressions, easily done on an organ. I don't know whether the organs of Bach's time allowed for different voices on the organ, the different pipes, the vox humana and all that sort of stuff, which you do with the stops on above the keyboard these days. I'll have to look into that. I don't know as much about the history of the organ as I should. John, prejudice against technology. Yeah, well, I think every generation has a little bit of prejudice against the technology of the next generation. I acknowledge that, for example, WSJT and the low signal, narrow bandwidth, so-called sub-noise level communication systems, digital comms on HF, are remarkable, but I've always sat back, and my concept of amateur radio perhaps is outdated in that I always saw it as a means of communicating ideas, be they ideas expressed in CW or audio or indeed video, which we're using at the moment, but it was a way of making the minds meet, whereas WSJT is just a process for transmitting and getting invariably a 5 and 9 report back with no other data. And I sat back and I thought, well, yes, it means that I can get to Upper Tajikistan on 500 milliwatts, but when the amount of information I transmit is so limited, what of it? Maybe I've missed the point. But, I'm not motivated by desire for DX. I'm motivated by a desire to communicate ideas. Perhaps that's just a personal prejudice. VK3BLX and the group VK3AML.
VK3AML and the group VK3BLX. Well, I don't know, Chris, I reckon if you go on the HF bands and have a listen around, the exchange of ideas is somewhat in the minority compared to most of what passes for a contact amongst the DX chasers, because short of that 5 and 9 send and receive that you were talking about on the weak signal modes, not a lot of difference really. Yes, there are a few conversations, but by and large there's very little more than an exchange of signal reports from what I can tell. Look, I took the trouble to have a quick look at the Australian film and whatever it's called, the Archives site, and they've got some information there about the Australian licensing arrangements, which was quite interesting. Just read a couple of lines. By the 1970s, combined TV and radio licences could be purchased for $26.50. Anyway, Whitlam government got in and it decided to abolish those in 1974. And if I scroll down a bit further, the federal government, the Fraser federal government, tried to introduce TV licence fees in 1975, recommending a fee of, wait for it, $70 for a colour TV and $50 for a black and white. But this suggestion was met with huge opposition. So, Dave, you were right. They certainly did intend to bring it in. I doubt they had the licences printed up in advance, but yeah, they certainly considered it. And don't worry, there's plenty of people, particularly in the world of private media, who would love to see a high cost attached to viewing the ABC, for instance. They'd either love to bring back licences or make it a sort of pay-per-view only model. But luckily that doesn't seem to be very popular amongst the masses just yet anyway. And my last comment was on Bax. Oh, Bax. I've had my fair share of problems. Haven't lost the use of my legs yet. All pretty good at the moment, but then one of my friends, we bike ride together, he innocently just bent over to pick something up off the grass, and as he did, he twisted. It was off to his side, and he just bent down, twisted a bit while he did it. Ooh, what was that little jab? Anyway, he spent the last month barely able to walk for the first week or so, and slowly getting over it. So once again, one of those things that's going to resolve itself with not much more than a bit of physio, but it is so easy to put a back out like that, and it takes such a long while to get over it again. All right, look, I might make this my final, guys. It's been nice to get back and have a chat again. Hope I'm not. It's not as long till I'm back with you again on a Saturday night. I know if I miss a Saturday night, I miss some awfully interesting stuff, Chris. So I'll do my best to keep my end up. VK3AML and the group VK3BLX is signing. See you later, all.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, John. Really appreciate that. And if you do miss the Saturday night live stream, it goes up as a recording. The only thing is, if there's any copyright dispute with any of the material, and this week's lot, who knows? I mean, who knows who is going to grab copyright for material that's 70 plus years old, but it does happen. And under those circumstances, one of the things I'm forced to do is to hit a little button that says trim, and it trims out the copyrighted section to make what remains non-copyright. I've done that a couple of times, and it's usually on stuff that you'd least expect. Like about 5 weeks ago, I transmitted the first sound documentary on an Australian Antarctic research expedition, 1931, shot by Frank Hurley and narrated by him. And in the background of that, he played various pieces of music, and wouldn't you know it, one piece of music barely audible above the background noise on the soundtrack of a 1931 vintage film, 91 years old, was a piece of music recognised by the scanning bots used by YouTube as something that belonged to a publishing house in Brazil who insisted on its suppression. Didn't want to hear it on YouTube. And it was 50 seconds worth in a 3-hour upload. Anyway, did the trim. You barely notice that it's gone, but it's gone. And it was things like that are totally unpredictable. So when I put this stuff up on live stream, I take a calculated risk not knowing where the copyright will go. But in the permanently kept copy, there may be some missing bits. There may be dispute, for example, from the BBC over some of that stuff related to them. Who knows? We'll just have to sit and watch and bear it. Now, back to Peter VK3ACZ. Have you got any suggestions as to exactly where you're going to go on Thursday, Pete? And will I meet you either at your place or at Baronia Station? VK3ACZ and group VK3AML. Weather permitting, of course.
And we say morning.
Oh, John.
Yeah, VK3AML and the group VK3ACZ. Good evening, John. And good night to the other John, BLX. And John actually did nail it in the sense of not a lot of exchange of ideas happened on the DX bands too, but I'll get onto that in a sec. Perhaps the best idea is, weather looks like the long-range forecast is it'll be fine, Chris, and of course you know the Weather Bureau's formula, don't you? Rain, hail, sleet or shine, your guess is as good as mine. But no, Monday apparently is the only wet day of the week so far. That'll be good. Perhaps Upper Gully Station around about 2. I think your bus goes to Upper Gully. That would be most convenient for both of us and pick you up on the way, say at 1400 hours. Intend to do more than just let you film getting set up. I want to put you on the microphone and get you to work some of this DX. Now, you do get, on 20 metres, you get everything from the slam bam, thank you ma'am, to the long rag chews. I've spoken with the Edmonton, Canada station for over an hour. Last week spoke to Echo India for about 30 minutes. There's everything involved there, but you can hear the stations that are just wanting a quick 5-9, get on with the next one. And what often happens, and I wasn't going to bellyache about this at all, but it's been really annoying me recently that I'm waiting in line. I'm getting killed in the pile-up, so I'm watching all the stations as they get their reports and go, and you'll always get a local here who wants to talk for 5 minutes. And you can feel the frustration of the DX station at the other end who wants to move on to the next one. But I suppose human nature's a funny one. There's a fella here who's only a couple of suburbs away from me with a 2-letter call. And I noticed it on 10 metres, and he was doing it today on 20. At the end of the QRZ from the DX, I'll come up with my call sign, and as I release the button, he's just giving the last 2 letters of his. So he's calling over the top of me, and I gather this is normal practice for a lot of the heavy hitters. There's a 2-letter call in New South Wales. Starts with sugar, and I don't need to say any more, but people like that are famous for calling over the top of other people in the middle of a QSO, and the worst part about it is that the DX station answers them because they're well known. I would consider it highly rude. So all this stuff isn't without its frustrations. Don't let me discourage you, Chris. But I would like to see if I can get you to catch the bug a little bit, because sometimes the hit and run stations are fun too. Just to think that you're getting a 5-9 report on the long path, and barring a massive CME or anything nasty with polar cap absorption, you should have no trouble with the long path. It's just 20 metres has been going gangbusters of late. Now, a story about where I usually go. There was a picnic table, a wooden picnic table and bench, and I turned up on Thursday, climbing up the hill with battery and shopping trolley and all the gear, and the bench is gone, and a fella was just putting the finishing touches on a new wet cement base for a new one. I turned up there today to find that it's a knee-high, sort of a table-y kind of thing. It'll be possible to sit on it and put the radio there, but nowhere near as good as having a bench. I've always run an end-fed antenna, which just means a squid pole, and put it up in an inverted V configuration, and that has the advantage of working 40, 20, 15 and 10. However, the last week or two I've been experimenting with flower pot antennas, and my 10 and 15 metre antennas were absolutely gangbusters. They tune across the band perfectly, all good. The 20 metre one, unfortunately, is a little bit long, and I had about 15 goes with a large weight trying to hurl it up over a branch so that I could get the coil base of the flower pot above the ground, which it needs to be. Don't know if you're familiar with flower pots. A fiendishly clever idea. The antenna consists of coax. You peel back the outer braid for the radiating part. There's a coax coil which is a choke, and the antenna works on the skin effect. So when the RF goes out to the end of the antenna and starts to come back with the intention of cooking the finals in your radio, a choke coil stops it, and absolutely brilliant. Marvellous in their simplicity to just think that it's a lump of wire. But anyway, I left the rope that I put up in this particular tree, hoping that nobody will see it between now and next Thursday. If somebody sees it and removes the rope, I won't make myself look silly by trying to hurl a rope over this 25 metre high branch again. I will just run with the end-fed. But anyway, that's pretty much the story for... hopefully you'll be coming along this Thursday and entertained. Back to you, VK3AML on the group, VK3ACZ.
Okay, Peter, that's a date. I better hand it round to John before any longer, before we hand it to Dave. So how have you been, John? And have you been following this stuff about early television, VK3GG, VK3AML?
Yeah, 3AML, VK3GG. Well, tonight, obviously, the YouTube wasn't putting out the thing on Android again, so I didn't see any of that. I have noticed when it doesn't put out on Android, it also doesn't put it out for the people trying to watch it on Raspberry Pis either, because whenever that happens, Nigel can't pick it up either, and he uses a Raspberry Pi with, what's it called, Pi-Arian or whatever it is. It's a flavour of Linux that runs on Raspberry Pis. So obviously the YouTube thing is selective as to what things it will put the thing out on. Yes, I found that all very interesting about the radio and TV licenses in England. I knew they still had them, but I didn't know they were, what were they, hundreds of pounds a year or something just to watch normal TV. As I remember, they were going to have that here, and they were going to make it back in 1975. I think it was going to be $75 for a colour licence, and Kerry Packer absolutely spewed. And then they had a few other things, and then they realised that the whole system in Australia was costing more than the revenue it generated, so they dropped them, thank goodness. Yes, fine on the comments about JST and all that. Well, that's why that hasn't really appealed to me. In fact, when I first got my licence, I did DX on 6 metres using my B47 and C42, and was able to talk all over Australia and do Rare DX and all the rest of it. But the fact that people were only interested in saying CQDX, hello, goodbye, the novelty wore off very quickly. I tend to like to actually have an intelligent conversation with someone, and in some ways I liken the Rare DX to what I used to do when I was a child with the old A and B button telephones, where I used to go and press the A and B buttons, and sometimes money would come out and I'd buy an ice cream with it, and sometimes I'd talk to people fiddling with the phone, and the Rare DX to me seems about the same as that. So it's not really my interest, but anyway, the crossbands and talking about things of substance is more interesting. Yes, and the other thing, yeah, those modern little cameras, I looked at them. Yes, they don't actually cost that much money either. And so, yeah, it might be interesting to play with. Yeah, so that was all very entertaining. I listened to all the commentaries about the TV stuff, but as I said, I couldn't watch it. Anyway, VK3EGG, bye.
No worries, John. It's... yeah, I can imagine the Packers or whatever objecting to the licence from the point of view of revenue. And it's interesting that the funding of the ABC has shifted from specifically being the licence fee to being a proportion of the exchequer. Pardon me. And any more discussion in that direction would be too political to be worthwhile. I note for the first week we've got a spam bot on the text chat on live stream saying naked HD XYZ online strips without clothing ! And he said it 40 times, and that's one of the reasons that I haven't opened this up for Zoom chat afterwards. I might give it a try, but if that sort of nitwit comes on and just tries to spam it, there is it just makes the whole thing not worthwhile to pursue in that direction. Ham radio at least has the filtering aspect of the people that you speak to having some sort of basic technical qualification, and having paid to get on the air, you tend not to mess it up too much, whereas with internet, anything that's free, like CB radio, tends to be subject to abuse. And I note the abuse from that nitwit or the bot that's been let loose on the text chat. Doesn't make much difference to what we do here, and I think probably on that basis I'd be better off pursuing Skype for feedback after the transmissions than going for Zoom. Too open to abuse. I'll have to familiarise myself with those systems much more. Anyway, it might be an idea for us to wind down. It's nearly 12:30, so I'll hand it round to Dave, possibly for a final. And I agree with what you say about the intellectual and cultural resources in England. There are some notable benefits to living in a place that's expensive but has that social interaction. As people, as Australians, like some of our expatriate literary people, Germaine Greer, and I'm just trying to think of his name, the famous humorist commentator who died recently in Britain with a variety of different illnesses. Emphysema was one. I think leukemia was another. Everything got to him in the end. He used to have television specials too, but those two found it difficult to live in Australia with the limited range of our news broadcasts and cultural life. And London is on my list of places to visit, particularly the Alexandra Palace, as you will understand from tonight's transmission. VK3 ECG for a final. Dave, VK3AML.
Yeah, VK3 ECG. Absolutely. I mean, I agree. It's. I must say I do like it here. I find the interactions of people are far more easygoing, and you can actually achieve things without having to wade through. You might think it's strange, but you can achieve things here without having to wade through entrenched viewpoints that are not going to change until there's a massive groundswell for that change. But you can be much more creative and achieve things in many ways in Australia. It's my take on it. But absolutely, I mean, if you're thinking of Clive James, and yeah, I mean, you know, as a sort of humorous satirist, whatever, extraordinary and very sad at the end. And I think that last classic interview of him with him was amazing, and well worth listening to. And some of his other writing, I think, is well worth thinking about as well, which is not straight comedy stuff. But I won't hold it on any longer. I think I was just saying at some stage you must have a look at some issues around pipe organs. Yeah, there was certainly quite a wide range of stops they had in the Baroque times. But you know, if you think of, was it Macy's or one of those amazing pipe organs that take up you know, massive floors of buildings, or some of the great concert pipe organs around today, you know, there was nothing like that in Bach's era. Even the grandest of the Protestant church organs had, you know, were comparatively small at the end of the day, and the range and opportunity and the number of manuals of the keyboards they would have had would have been were far more limited. But you know, great stuff as well. And you could change the volume on those organs, and of course changing the registration, that is the selection of the stops at different points in the music, changed things enormously. There's a really interesting, if you get a chance to look on YouTube, there's a really interesting, I think it's the Cathedral Music Association or whatever in the UK has actually got something like almost all of the cathedrals in England, which they play the Toccata and Fugue in D minor, and it's like literally it's one phrase at one organ, and it's cut and edited into another organ in another place, and it's absolutely extraordinary. I mean, I think it's a bit of a gimmick, obviously, but it just goes to show what the sound difference is, and the different, you know, even the same registration of stops sounds so different with the building changing and the organ changing, of course. So it's just an interesting sort of exercise, I suppose, and it's part of a sort of you know, they're seeking funding for church music and so on, which is really a very, very interesting experience. But yes, I mean, the modern organs are just stunning, and some of those big American ones are absolutely amazing. And then you've got all the Wurlitzers, of course, which go back to the days of silent film, and the keyboard players that would provide the extemporized and improvised soundtracks in the film hall. So fascinating. Anyway, I'll make this my final and wish everyone a good night and a good morning. And thank you very much, Chris. A really interesting test transmission tonight, and lots of fabulous videos to watch on YouTube. And I must have a look at the kinescopes and site and see what is there. All the best, everyone, and hopefully chat sometime again soon. VK3 ECG now off and clear with VK3AML ACZ. I think John's BLX has gone, and good evening and cheerio to you, John, VK3 EGG. This is VK3 ECG off and clear.
Okay, round to Peter for a final, and then we'll be tying the ribbons with John 3EGG, I think. A VK3 ACZ and group, and that's a date, up at Ferntree Gully, 2 p.m. On Thursday. VK3 ACZ, and good night, Dave. VK3 ACZ, VK3AML.
Yeah, 3AML in the diminishing group, 3ACZ returning. Yeah, all good, Chris. I'll look forward to that. And I was perhaps a bit long-winded, but I'm sure there's a place for the quick hit-and-run reports as well as the reg chews, and one can become the other different times too. I had a couple of contacts with Italy on 10 metres this afternoon, and yes, they were brief. One was a special event call sign, but still, I like knowing my voice gets over there. That's the fun. And anyway, until then, thanks again for tonight. Wow, what a wonderful walk down history lane that was. Absolutely fantastic. Thanks so much for it. Good night, Dave. Good night, John. Good night, Chris. Look forward to doing it all again next week. VK3AML 73, VK3ACZ.
Okay, and for the benefit of people watching from Britain, I know there are a couple there, it is now 36 minutes past midnight on a Sunday morning. What will the vicar say when I don't turn up for church? Mind you, I haven't turned up for church for the last 50 years. Over to you, John, for a final. VK3GG, VK3AML.
Yes, 3AML, VK3EGG, yes. Well, pity I couldn't watch the thing tonight, but anyway. Yes, that's right. The other thing I forgot to comment on was harpsichords. Well, a friend of my father's in Melbourne Uni was a guy by the name of Meredith Moon, who worked in the Conservatorium of Music, and he also used to manufacture harpsichords, which used to take him about a year to make. He used to make them in his house in Hawthorne, and he used to get thousands of dollars for them back then, because they were most of a year's work to make. But that was all quite interesting. I think that VK3SL might have known Meredith Moon as well when he was studying music. But yes, Stephen Langley. So yes, all quite entertaining. Perhaps I might be able to get a disc or something of the goings on about the early TV. I don't know. But yes, that's the trouble with YouTube. All the things about. In fact, I was looking at a thing on my mobile phone early tonight, a website called Techmoan. Anyway, he had cylinder phonographs, and you can actually get modern contemporary music releases on phonograph cylinders. There's a couple of rock bands or whatever that made 4-minute cylinders as part of their sales gimmick. But if you put one on a phonograph with the right 4-minute stylus and lead screw, they do actually play. And this Techmoan guy, he has all these old formats that people play with, and he's got equipment to demonstrate them on his website. Everything from digital audio cassette that didn't last very long to L cassette to reel-to-reel to 8-track count, all these different formats that we've had. Sooner or later he'll have a thing about it on that website, which I do watch from time to time, which is all quite interesting. Oh, and I was also talking to Dan Murter. Apparently, I forget which city it is in America, but they've kept an analog TV channel going, so people can still see a picture on their old TV sets if they want to. I always wanted to go to England when I was younger and actually have a look at the 405 line TV there, because it was still going back in the 70s, and also have a look at listening to VLF over there on a normal Sievers, like Dave's done, because even though half my family came from England, my mother's side, I've never been to England. Been to Japan though. I spent most of a year in Japan. But anyway, I guess I'm rambling on too long. I just thought I'd try and comment on some of the things I heard in the background while I was doing other things. And so I'll put it back, and whoever it is to take it, and I guess I'll say morning after that.
Okay, John, thanks for that. You'll be able to see tonight's transmission, hopefully, if we haven't got any copyright issues. You never can predict where they're going to arise. Hopefully, if there are no copyright issues, that tonight's session will be up there in perpetuity, and you can access it. Well, we'll eventually be able to access it by dialing VK3AML 9 April 2022, or go to my Oz Radio Historian webpage for YouTube, and you should see a cover photo for the clip which shows Zworykin holding an emitron, iconoscope, camera tube, and the title on it is Inventing Television, which I thought was a suitable title for the night's general subject. Okay, good night, John. Good night, Dave, other John, Peter, anybody else who's listening, and the people on the live stream. Just looking at the list, Paul 3HN, thanks for persisting. Alan Giles, nice to see you looking in from Britain. Who else now, who else? John Young, Harry Thau, Van Dan Escobar, Chris Baird, all of the regulars. And we've got the spam bot offering free online strips. I hope the strips are tunable. Are they strip tuned for 6 metres, perhaps? Anyway, with that, all the best, John. VK3AML now clear.
Yeah, one final thing I forgot to mention. This Techmoan fellow, he said he can put as many phonograph cylinders on YouTube, and he gets away with it. But as soon as he starts playing any 78s or whatever, the copyright people come and get him. So, I mean, it's ridiculous when you get done for copyright when the music's that old. I guess there is a case for having things like 6 metre stereo FM on the air again if I can ever get the money to replace the original emitters, which I now find got stolen and things like that. But anyway, we'll say morning.
Okay, John. Yeah, well, I put up with the copyright because the coverage and the video quality that I can get on internet live stream are so much better than ATV or amateur radio, and the worldwide permanent nature of the uploads also is a major thing in its favour. So I try to avoid music because of the copyright snags I can run into, rather than the imaginary music problems that some hams have with music on the air. Music is not any more illegal on Australian ham radio. It's one of the very few countries where it is legal. And from that point of view, people who came up with the Wireless Telegraphy Act for getting their ham licence prior to 1995 probably have a different belief as to what the law is. The law has changed a great deal since the Radio Comms Act came in. And anybody listening, if you want to have a look, it's downloadable as a PDF file. All the best, VK3AML Clear.
Yeah, well, that's interesting, yes, because as we all know, music was legal on amateur radio up to World War II. And then when we had to cease and desist from doing our hobby during the war, I've actually collected some books. Now, some of the older ARRLs had the American Amateur Regulations in a section of the older ARRL, and the original 1947 Blue Regulations book, which became the yellow one. If you go and get the blue one, which I do have here, when they reintroduced amateur radio here in 1947, the regulations suddenly became a photocopy of the FCC regulations, because I've done a bit of a hysterical collection of old books and noted that. So yes, it's all very interesting, and so we went through the terrifying Silvers age, but when the Stew got booked, after the branch got booked several times and the thing backfired in the PMG's face, that put an end to Silver's raids to put people off the air for having music in general. I know Nigel and I got a visit from Les Ray for some test transmissions, but he lost his job when we complained to the department because he was actually bullying amateurs and he was already on a warning thing, and when we complained, he got his third strike and he was out, and then he was promoted to reading electricity meters and he wasn't an RI anymore, which was very good. And of course now you're allowed to have music anyway, which is even better. I actually think that these WIAs and ARRLs and RSGBs, they go out of their way to preserve amateur radio the way it used to be, but very selectively with their Morse code and everything. But then a lot of the other things that amateurs did, such as pioneering broadcast techniques and things, well, they don't want to borrow that, so it's very one-sided. And seeing that amateur radio has the potential to be many different things to many different people, they shouldn't really be legislating half the hobby to be illegal. Anyway, with that comment, we say morning.
And VK3AML also clear. Thanks, John. All the best.
Good morning.
And thank you to all the people that came up on the live stream. Appreciated. God knows what the Naked HD XYZ online strips without clothing was all about, being repeated on and on, but it may have cluttered the text chat, but otherwise didn't affect us at all. This is VK3AML, now concluding the live stream. It's 12:47 a.m. Sunday morning, and no doubt next week we'll have a bit of video of the field trip for HFDX that I'll be making with Peter 3ACZ on Thursday. Looking forward to that. Have a good week, people. Have a good week. And don't let the bed bugs bite. Good night.